meeting by reading the Indigenous Solidarity Statement. So we'd like to acknowledge that Concordia University is on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. The Concordia Student Union recognizes and respects the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. The roll call sheet should be somewhere. Can anyone confirm that we have one? Okay, if not, we'll create one and send it around. For a roll call, we'll also be dealing with excusals. So we have two different types of excusals to deal with today. First off, consent training, which was held last Wednesday, and second off, this council itself. So I'll actually reverse what I just said and start with the council ones. So I've received a number of requests for excusals, both from execs and from councillors. So we'll start with the execs because their excusals have to be done separately as they incur a monetary penalty for not being at a council meeting. So I've received excusals from 3 different executives who are all who are sick and can't make it. So Asma, Devin, and Gabby as well. So if council would like to entertain their requests, now would be the time. Yes, Jeremy?
I move to excuse these executives.
Okay, do we have a second? Patrick? Is there any discussion to be had on the excusals? Okay, so if not, all those in favor, please raise your placards. 8. All those opposed? 0. And any abstentions? 0. All right, that's perfect. I will notify them. I have some requests for excusal from councillors. So that would be Charlotte, Rory, Khadija, Dylan, Julia, Michaela, and Reem. They've all sent me valid excusals. We don't really give the reasons in open session just because some are for personal reasons, but I have received documentation from a number of them, including health certificates or doctor's notes, proof of midterms or not finals, proof of exams, and such documentation. Yes, Jeremy?
Oh, I was going to say, can I add my name to that list?
Oh, that for consent training?
Yeah.
That's going to be next.
Cool.
This is just counselors for this meeting.
Oh, I understand.
Yes.
Information. Can you repeat the name, please?
Yep. Charlotte, Rory, Khadija, Dylan, Julia, Michaela, and Reem.
Can my name put on it too as well?
For this meeting?
Oh no, for this meeting. I'm so sorry. Okay. Never mind.
All right, so we're just talking about this council meeting. All right, so if council would like to entertain a motion for either their excusal to split specific people, anything like that, now would be the time. Yes, to be it.
I mean, to excuse them.
Okay, do we have a second? Ali, is there any discussion to be had? Okay, so all those in favor of excusing Charlotte, Rory, Khadija, Dylan, Julia, Michaela, and Reem, please raise your placards. 8, 9, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. Perfect. Okay, so now we'll, yes, I would say.
Point of personal privilege, can we please, for the reporters here, before they take pictures, they ask the room if they're feeling comfortable with it, because I am not.
Okay.
I don't want to be in the pictures.
Is there anybody else that does not feel comfortable with having their pictures taken? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Good use of a point of personal privilege, so the reporters will take note of those who raise their hands. Yes, I would say.
Point of personal privilege, can I have like this noted? That,
This request?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's not a problem. We can take note of that for future meetings as well. All right. So with that, we can move on to the consent training excusals. So I received a few requests by email. So those who didn't attend and didn't send me a request can either retroactively request maximum of next council meeting, or it just goes as 2 absences. So I've received a request from Rory, who was ill, and I received a request for excusal from Kemi as well, who's here. So I have Jeremy, Kemi, and Rory who have actually sent me or requested excusal. So if either of you would like to discuss it or just let council
I have a
decide. Yep.
If I was absent, can I excuse myself now? Or
Yeah, do you want a request for excusal from the consent training?
Yep.
All right, so that's Sally, Kemi, Jeremy, and Rory that we have requests for excusal from for the consent training. Yes, Jeremy?
Do we have to provide a reason? Or
No, absolutely not. It's up to you. So council can either excuse or discuss. Yes, Jeremy?
The reason I was absent, it was an emergency last minute. My grandmother was in the hospital and she was going to be alone by herself, and so we didn't want to be alone, so I made myself available on the day of consent training. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Kemi?
I had pneumonia, and I actually have like doctor documentation telling me not to do anything that week, so there you go. I'm better, thank you.
Thank you. Sally?
The reason I was absent because I had work till late and I couldn't come back for the concert.
All right, thank you very much. And once again, you don't need to feel obligated to explain. Rowan, sorry.
Just for clarification, it's in the standing ranks, people who missed it will be going to the next one.
Yes.
And okay. I move to excuse.
Okay, so that would be Rory, Jeremy, Kemi, and Sally. Okay, do we have a second? Tabia? If there's no discussion, all those in favor of the 4 consent training excusals, please raise your placards. 7. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1. Perfect, so that carries, and those 4 will be excused. I will make a note of that. All right, so with that, we can move on to the approval of tonight's agenda, and I know there's a lot of points to add, so I'll just go around the room this way. Yes, Rowan?
I move to add HVAC into new business substantive.
Okay, yeah, it's actually Ahmed's point, but I'll add it at the end since he'll be coming a little bit later. Moving along, yes, Veronica?
Yeah, I'd like to add CCSL to appointments
Okay,
and also Lev Buckman letter to informational. Okay. That works.
that works. Sule?
Yeah, I'd like to add the audit report, which is going to be substantial, because I think there's a motion that we need to make, as well as the health and dental plan premium payment,
All right,
which is also,
thank you. Awati?
I'd like to add AVEC committees to new business substantive.
Epic committees. Yep.
Also, maybe in the new business informational, I'd like to add council meeting minutes.
There we go. All right, going around, I think there's a few more. Yes, Omar?
I'd like to pull the general coordinator's report
Okay, I'll put it at the end since it's a report.
and add the daycare play area contract.
Care, play area, contract. Okay, Veronica?
I'd like to add tribunal pool to appointments.
Okay. Cool. Okay, Omar?
Just not sure if Ahmed already mentioned, but because he's not here, I'd like to add unpaid internships referendum question.
Ahmed's right
It's
there.
just arrived.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
But I
I'll
will
pass
add
it on to him.
I'll add it and put his name next to it. Ahmed, I think you had some other things to add as well?
Yes, presentation, we have CREM, C-R-E-M, and we have substantive, we have also CREM and FEP.
So Kim should be in substantive and presentation?
There is a motion.
Okay, I'll just put it in substantive and we can deal with it. Is there anyone external that's here to do the, okay, so then I'll keep it in presentation and we can do the motion then. Veronica?
Yeah. Also,
Oh, sorry, did you have something else to add?
The referendum question, we have 3 referendum question, unpaid internships,
Yeah.
law 62, and anti-racism.
Okay. That works. Veronica?
yeah, by-elections
Okay.
to substantive.
All right. And Layla?
I'm sorry, this has already been said, but was staff added to appointments?
No, it was not. So I will add that at the end. Unfortunately, Gabby had to leave because she's not feeling well. Would anyone just be able to add Loyola coordinator report, preferably Rowan since he pulled it? Yeah. all our lives easier. Okay, so is there anything else to add before the agenda is set? Oh, yes, Marcus.
Point of information.
Yes.
Is social economy incubator in the agenda?
Yeah, because you sent it out before. It's called Special Economy Incubator.
Okay. Well,
Did I write it wrong?
I believe so.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, yeah, that's in substantive. Yes, that was it.
Point of information, I believe in the last special council meeting, the motion for Bill 62 was presented. Is it coming back to this council? No?
Can anyone?
Yeah.
Omar?
I'm not sure, but I think, you want to elaborate on that?
Okay, so there was a motion.
To bring it back, but I'm not sure.
Is it coming back?
I didn't receive any documents about it. Layla?
It should be in the documents regarding referendum questions. It's specifically approving a referendum question.
Points for referendum.
It's all our referendum questions get approved at council, so it's one of the referendum questions.
Okay, so I have on point L, for referendum questions, I have the Silk Fund, I have CFC, and then I have a point called just referendum questions where we can deal with the ones that all came in the document at the same time. Okay, is there anything else to add to the agenda? All right, so with that, I'll just need a motion to approve the agenda and all items under consent. Yes, Veronica?
Motion to approve.
Okay, do we have a second? Ali? All those in favor of approving the agenda, please raise your placards. 10. All those opposed? And any abstentions? 0. Perfect. So I will make a nice version of this agenda and send it out as a PDF in 2 seconds. All right, so the agenda is posted in the group. So with that, we can move on to our first presentation, which is Layla and orientation postmortem.
I'm so sorry. This should have happened before, but I meant to readjust so that I was the last of the presentations because we have invited guests and I want to allow them to leave as soon as possible. Is that
Yeah, can we just accept that under unanimity? Okay, so we'll just deal with the orientation one at the end of the presentations. And we'll start with Library Service Fund, and Guylaine, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I'm Guylaine, I'm your university librarian. I brought some bags and sticky notes if it's for you, or if you want to use them. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk about the Library Services Fund. This is something that I think is making a huge difference for the quality of our library services. That we thought the members of the Library Services Fund committee that you would be interested to know more about. So the background. The Library Services Fund provides students with collections, resources, services to enhance the library services and inspire academic success. That's why we are there. And every day that we're working, we're making our decisions towards this goal. Since 2010, undergraduates have contributed $1 per credit to the Library Services Fund. And the fund is managed by the Library Services Fund Committee. So there was a referendum held in the fall of 2009. And starting in January 2010, on January 6, if I remember well, the Webster Library started to be open 24/7, even before we signed the agreement between the Concordia University and the CSU. That was a 10-year agreement, so the current agreement ends in December 2019. So the purpose of the Library Services Fund: 24 access to the Webster Library, increased availability for laptops and netbooks. So this is the wording we had in the referendum questions. For the 24 access, actually, we're giving access to both the Vanier Library on this campus and the Webster Library 24/7. Instead of netbooks, that was a term that we were using in 2009, we went with laptops, certainly, but also with tablets. Increased availability of course packs and textbooks. Actually, we are buying every textbook and course pack for all undergraduate courses. It's what we're doing, and making them available either in the Webster Library Reserve Room or in the Vanier Library Reserve Room. We're not buying a lot in digital form because it's a question of economic model. The publishers, the textbook publishers are not selling to institutions any digital textbook. The market is for individuals. We don't like it. Librarians, we're working toward another type of economic model outside of the big commercial publishers for textbooks, but it's the reality we have. And improve silent and quiet study zones and additional study space in the Webster Library. That was really before the big renovation. And for those of you who were there before the renovation, noise in the library and lack of space were our two big problems. So this was the question, the text of the question. So you will recognize the 5 items. And this was the flyer that was developed by the CSU to communicate to the student body about the referendum. So just I'm a librarian, so I like to keep these things and to show them after. No. The Library Services Fund Committee, so it's composed of 4 student representatives selected by you. This year, Asma, Leila, Julia, and Michaela are your representatives. I'm chairing the committee. The budget and facility manager is part of it, 2 associate university librarians, and an observer from advancement. I have to say, Leila can say, but I have to say that it's the committee that we prefer, and I'm not saying that because you're in front of us, but we love it because with students, we determine what we want to do and we deliver. It's very fast. Every year we identify priorities and we deliver within the year. We have 3 to 4 meetings per year, and I want to show you that at that address. So if you go to on the library website about the Library Services Fund Committee, oh, it's not showing. Here. It's very funny. Can you help me? Yeah, it's because there's dual screen, I guess. Whose card is this? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Coming. Yeah. So it's here, and you have all the annual reports since the beginning. They're there, and you have the composition of the committees for the year, what we delivered, the statistics. You have everything. So the actual agreement itself, and you'll have the financial statement, the financial report. With this committee, we really work with a philosophy of open book. We share all the information. We have nothing to hide. screen now. Maybe share on screen.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, so maybe we should maybe start. Good. Okay. So the achievement, 24/7 access to both libraries. And you see the statistics of the usage of the library during the night for the winter and the fall semester. It's pretty impressive, as you can see. Your contribution is not going, somewhere that is not used. Each time it's a visit of someone who needed to use the library between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. And this is only for 1 year, but we have the data since the beginning. Course reserve rooms, so we created the rooms because in the old time we had the reserve behind the circulation desk, behind the loans desk. But with all these textbooks, we didn't have enough space behind the desk. So we created an open access room, so you can go and the books are shelved by course code, course numbers. We did the same in both libraries. 300 laptops and 126 tablets on loan, for free of course. You see the data, only in 2016, over 65,000 laptop loads, an average of more than 8,000 loans per month during the academic year. And over 9,000 loans for tablets, and the tablets are 3-day loans. The laptops will be 1 day long very, very soon. Now it's 8 hours, but we're changing that for your convenience. Touchscreens tablets at the group study rooms. I think you like this system, the book system with your iPad. And another example is the green walls. You may have noticed in the Webster Library those big black panels. So now we cannot put the plants there because they made a mistake. The light that we have on the ceiling, if we put the plants there, the plants will die because the lights are not the right ones. So we're expecting those lights to be changed in the coming weeks. And there's an irrigation system that has been installed on the 3rd floor. And the plants will be watered automatically. And someone will come once a month to trim. So the Library Services Fund paid for the actual panels, the plants, and this system. But the maintenance is paid by the university. Other projects we did, the Webster Library Technology Program. So if you haven't visited the Technology Sandbox, I invite you to go and try out. It's not only for engineering and science students, for all students. And there's always someone there, Yasha, Taylor, and others, to help you out in discovering that type of technology, 3D printing, drones, all kinds of things, virtual reality, and so on. Visualization Studio will open in December. We bought 123 licenses of Antidote, French and English correctors. They are on the 2nd floor and the ground floor of the Vanier Library. Plants, in addition to those walls, plants in the libraries, new furniture at Vanier. While we were renovating the Webster Library, we kept the Greyhounds reading room open later. I think it's until 1 a.m. during exam period because we felt that we were short of space in the Webster Library, thanks to this fund again. The lunch area in the Webster Library, electrical outlets at the beginning of the fund. So those are examples. We have cords, chargers for mobiles that you can loan at the desk. Many other things, but those are the main ones. So in closing, as you may have understood, the period for the first referendum is coming to an end. And at the Library Services Fund Committee, we talked about the opportunity for you to organize a referendum in the spring of 2018. A question for you. A question that we also discussed is should we reach out to our friends at the GSA to invite them to contribute to the library project as well. So it's a question that we have. It's only a question for now. We're not starting from the answer. We would like next to identify priorities. If the answer to the first question is yes, we'll have to work together to identify the priorities. What will be the content of the question for the referendum if you decide. If there is no referendum or a negative vote, we at the library, we will have to retire some services. And that has to be planned. You cannot shut down a 24/7 library overnight. We'll have to communicate that. So this is something that we need to discuss too. And so the next step that we're proposing is to organize a workshop. And what we were thinking is to have the 4 student representatives from the Library Services Fund Committee with a few members of the university, maybe someone from the GSA, to look at those questions, identify the other questions that we want to discuss, and bring all the information together for you to deliberate and make a decision. So this is what I wanted to share with you. Do we have time for a few questions?
Yeah, absolutely. We have one in the corner here.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a pretty obvious choice that this is something that our students benefit from, and we should definitely go forth with another referendum question. But I just wanted to express support for the idea of GSA possibly doing the same thing, because I think, A, that's only fair, and I am curious, as of right now, do graduate students have 24-hour access to the library and access to the laptops as well? Then yeah, I think it's logical that they go through the same, if not a similar process, and also chip into this.
Just to share the information, when we worked on the first referendum, approaches were made to the GSE, and I was not there, I was in the role of Director of Webster. It was my predecessor, Gerald Beasley, who was responsible for the project, and for different good reasons or bad reasons, I don't know, the project did not go ahead. But certainly we can. I think it's a fair proposal.
Right. Are there any more questions for Guylaine? Right. Do you have anything else to add?
Yes, actually, I have to. You know, I'm also working on the digital strategy. If you are interested in digital strategy and technology in general, we would like to have a few students involved in the working group for the digital strategy, and we are also planning to organize a survey, not for all students, but for a sample of students on your digital experience. It's an international survey that Concordia was accepted to be part of, and we would like to have a student representative on that working group for the survey. So two, the digital strategy, Concordia digital strategy, and the survey on the digital experience. It doesn't have to be a resolution and someone nominated by the CSU, but if you are or you know someone who you think will be interested, send me an email. We'll be more than happy to have your contribution.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, yes, sorry.
What do you mean by digital, like?
Digital strategy?
Yeah, digital, what do you mean by digital, like?
All the means, the tools that we're using to express ourselves in the digital culture. This is not an IT strategy, it's more the human at the center of the strategy and how we can better improve what we're doing by offering a digital environment that allows us as students, staff, faculty members to develop ourselves and express ourselves in the digital culture. Very rapidly said, but we can talk if you want to know more. I think it's very exciting.
Is there any more, or are there any more questions for Guylaine?
So do you agree with the next step with the workshop? Do you think it's a reasonable next step? Is it going in the direction you would like? So we can, lay down everything on the table and see where we want to go. So you encourage us for doing that. Good.
Yes, Layla?
Thank you for coming today, Guylaine. And I think generally my read of the room is that there's a really good understanding of what has happened with the Library Service Fund and what the goals are moving forward and how organizing a referendum question could take place. And perhaps to like bridge a little bit the gap if people have more questions to approach anyone who's on the Library Service Fund Committee, or you can email me and I can put you in contact with Guylaine, because I think this is something that we can be working towards for the March election, which is not actually that far away as far as developing strategies and referendum questions. So if this is something that we put forward to students, then obviously having everyone in this room's input on that question and on that strategy would be super useful. So if you have any further thoughts that don't come up now, please reach out to Guylaine or myself or Julia or Michaela. We're all
Your input will be very important. We don't want to create a campaign of fear, but I'm telling you, if we don't have your support, it's impossible. We won't be able to open 24/7. We won't be able to buy all these textbooks. It's just the reality of things. There's only one library in Quebec open 24/7, and it's yours. And there's only 5 in Canada. So it's not for nothing. It's because the budget we receive from the government doesn't allow us to offer that kind of service. So yeah, but we have to be very careful because we don't want to play in that movie to bring a negative message to our students. Okay, so thank you. So I'm going to take care of my little dog now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your invitation. Thank you.
And have a good evening.
Thank you. You too. You have been busy. And don't forget the bags and the sticky notes. And if you have anything to say about the library, please send me an email. We love doing that.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. So is there any more discussion to be had about Library Services Fund before we move on? Okay. The next thing I have on the agenda is presentations. Our turn by Layla. Do you want to? Yes.
I move to table that indefinitely. I'm going to cover all the points under the substantive point.
Yep, absolutely. Do you have a second? Rowan, all those in favor of tabling it indefinitely, it'll come back, don't worry. 9, all those opposed, 0, and any abstentions? 1. Perfect. So that will be tabled indefinitely. And then I have the crème, which is Ahmed.
Yes. So here we have Mati.
Yep.
Hi.
Floor is yours.
Where should I?
Marcus, do you mind ceding the floor to another presenter?
I can go wherever.
Do you need the computer or?
I could use it. I could.
Just hit the.
It's wherever you feel most comfortable.
I have something I could show.
Just hit the picture mute, and if you want the projector to be turned.
Okay. No skills with that kind of thing. So, I'll start off with. I'm Mathis Alali. I'm external coordinator at FICUM, which is the campus association at University of Montreal. But I'm here today more as a spokesperson for CREM, which is Coalition Régionale Étudiante de Montréal. So I'll kind of go quickly over what CREM is and why it's been created, and then present you what we have done, and I just present you like the initiative and to see what's your feedback about it. So. When we were, I was speaking with other student representatives from other universities and speaking about the municipal election that's coming up November 5th. And we were looking, about the things that we could do to have a weight in the balance when we were speaking to different political parties for the municipal election. And we thought that if we would get together and join our forces, we could be stronger and we could have more like a reach that would be more powerful when speaking with Nicolas, Valérie Plante, and the other parties for the election. So we, in fact, it's the Student Association from Polytechnique Montréal that sent an email to all the student association, CEGEPs, colleges, and universities across Montreal, to see if people were up for that kind of coalition, punctual coalition. And we held meetings with the different student associations that answered positively. And we went across what the structure should be, what the demands should be, and everything. It was based on a kind of process that had been done in the past. For example, we had is there anyone over 25 here? Yeah. Well, you have now access to the student fair on your Opus card. That was a battle that was led by Krem many years ago, and that concluded this year. And so after that, Krem disappeared because it's a punctual coalition, and we brought it back. During meetings, we had up to 18 and 20 different propositions that we could ask the candidates for the election, and we narrowed it down to 8. And we started with those 8 demands. We started reaching out to all the universities, student associations from CEGEP and universities to see who would support or not. From now, we're at 16 students associations that support from universities and CEGEPs. And we've already, with these demands, we went public with it, so we sent our platform to the different parties. They answered to the demands, and both Denis Coderre and Valérie Plante approved all of our demands and added information so that we could tell our students which party wants what kind of thing for the student demands. And we produced a visual, so that's what I thought I could show, but I don't know how it works. So, so it's like a visual presentation of the different parties, the different demands, and who said what about what. And we'll spread that across our students so that they have information of what the different candidates said about their demands, what they decided that they wanted to bring up. So that I went pretty fast across the whole process. Do you guys have questions, or do you want precisions, or?
Ahmed?
Yeah. Can you please read like the 8 demands?
Oh, of course.
Which party support which demand?
Of course. So I'll just get it on my computer. If it wants to open, yeah. So the first, we had 4 demands that were around the concept of public transportation. The first one was the extension of the blue line that's been promised for decades now, and that's not been done yet. Both parties agreed and were 100% with us. We asked about an improvement of the STM night service, because there's a huge lack about that service during night. So Projet Montreal and Valérie Plante said yes and added that they wanted to put in place a nightlife policy for Montreal that would one person would be in charge of the whole Montreal nightlife. And nightlife it's not just the nightlife downtown, it's the whole night in Montreal. So that would be also with public transportation. And Denis Coderre said yes, but not for the metro hours. And Valérie Plante said yes for that. I don't know if you've seen, but in the past year, there was some modification of, it was the AMT before who decided of the fares for public transportation. It's now ARTM, l'Autorité Régionale de Transport Métropolitain. And they'll go over the fares for all STM, for Laval, for Longueuil also. And we ask that when they will review the fares, that we keep at least 40% of discount for the student fare, because in some places it's 20%, and we want to make sure that it doesn't reduce the discount that students have. And both parties said yes, and that they wanted a social rate for public transportation for low-income users. We wanted them to evaluate the possibility for having student fare for part-time students, which is not possible right now. We don't have a specific demand because we couldn't, do the research on time to propose them something, but we want them to evaluate the possibility of doing that. We also asked, and they said yes, by the way. We've asked for student fare for Bixi. That's been adopted by both parties, so both parties said that they would want to do that. We asked them to prioritize affordable housing in Montreal. Both parties said yes with specific actions that they would do. It's a number of units. So Projet Montréal said that they would ask for 30% of affordable and social housing in developments of 5 or more units. And Denis Coderre said 5,000 units of affordable housing in the next 4 years, and more student housing near the stations of the Blue Line that are to come. We asked for to include student homelessness in the next action plan of the City of Montreal about homelessness. That's an amendment that we actually did at University of Montreal, because I don't know if you guys, I think you guys participated to the UTIL survey about student housing. At U of Montreal, we asked for a specific question about student homelessness, and the data that we got is that 1 out of 20 of our students live in a situation of homelessness in the past year. So that's 5%. So that's like huge. And we want the City of Montreal to get that information and to try to get more info and to see how they can act on that problem. Both parties said yes. And finally, we wanted to reserve a seat that was for someone 35 or under on all the boards of directors of the City of Montreal and on all the committees where decisions are taken at the City of Montreal. Both parties said yes. Denis Coderre focused on 50 committees, and Projet Montréal didn't, they didn't specifically spot committees. Both parties added that they want to create a youth council in each borough of Montreal. And Denis Coderre wants to mandate the Office de Consultation Publique de Montréal to increase youth participation in what it does. So both parties said yes also. So these are the 8 demands. I know I went pretty quickly over them. I could pass my computer around if you want to have a look or something. Or I can just...
There was another question here.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, how would CSU's support be translated? Are you requesting CSU to support you in terms of supporting the demands, or taking a role within CREM, or being a member of CREM?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
So there's no membership in CREM because there's no, CREM is nothing. CREM is just a punctual coalition. It's just to say that we get together around specific demands. So it doesn't ask for anything apart that when, because now when I met with, spokesperson from CREM, we met with Denis Coderre, we met with Valérie Plante. We didn't mention Concordia in these universities that were asking for that. If you guys would say that you support the demands, well, we would include the CSU in the demand. Do you see what I mean? It's just a question of saying who are behind these demands, and if we're more, it has more weight. So that's why that's the purpose of it.
Did you have a follow-up question? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, it's just a group of people that actually does the on-the-ground work without having meetings before with the groups, with the unions and groups that support it?
Well, we had meetings.
Okay.
We had several meetings. We had to go pretty fast because we started the first meeting in September, and so we had to go fast. We had meetings week in, week out. And during these meetings, we went over with our different positions from our books of positions from different student associations on the demands that we wanted to ask. Then we decided what way we wanted to take, which way we wanted to take for making it public. Did we want to go directly to the parties? Go to the medias? All these discussions were done in the early meetings.
Thank you. There was a question here and then one there. Veronica?
For your presentation,
Yeah.
maybe, well, the PowerPoint, maybe if you could send it to the chair and it could be distributed.
Of course.
It's just chair@csu.qc.ca. You can send that to me and I'll make sure that it's disseminated to all of council. And Rowan, you had a question?
Yep. I was just wondering, because you said that they like approved a lot of the demands, etc. And I recognize that like getting politicians to actually make any sort of commitment can be difficult, but I was wondering, has there been any like public statements by the candidates, etc., promises made on these issues?
So both parties released press releases with all their supports. When we met, we sent a request for a meeting with Nicodère. He received us at City Hall. And afterwards, we were kind of, we didn't know, but he called the medias and he went in a press scrum in front of different medias. There was, I think, CTV was there, Journal 24 Heures, La Presse, Le Devoir, and he made everything we talked about public. And they both made statements on social medias, and so they went public with what they said. It wasn't just, yeah, we'll do that. And
did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, on a unrelated note. I was wondering why you picked the age 35 instead of either going younger or just directly going for a student representative, although I understand finding one student representative could be difficult.
We went for 35 because in the past year at the provincial level there was a bill that was passed for keeping a seat for people under 35 on the boards of Société d'État. What is it in English? State societies? Yeah, that would be that. And so we thought that with that being passed, we had an argument saying, you know, they do it for the whole province. Why wouldn't Montreal follow?
All right. Is there any more questions for Matthias? Matthias, sorry.
No problem.
All right. Do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay.
So I'll send the visual as soon as my computer wants to collaborate. And that's it. That's it. I hope you guys wish to join us, and that would be awesome.
All right. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any more discussion to be held on this point? All right. So if not, next is orientation post-mortem. But I received word that Omar.
Just because there are representatives from the CFC, one of which have to leave soon. So if everyone's okay with it, we'll just go to the CFC referendum question, speak about that first, and then we'll continue with the presentations.
Is everyone amenable to this? Specifically Marcus, because I think you've got a presentation coming up. And Layla.
Spoken to
Point of information.
Yeah.
Is there pizza on the way?
There's falafel sandwiches on the way.
Right on. All right. Perfect. Sounds good.
Okay, so if everyone's okay with it, we can move on to the CFC referendum question, and I'll just ask you to, Veronica?
Yeah, okay, so I didn't prepare a motion for this, but I guess I'll just read the referendum question. Do you agree to increase the fee levy of the Concordia Food Coalition by 8 cents per credit to a total of 16 cents per credit effective winter 2018?
Just to clarify, the motion is to put that on the ballot, though.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so in the referendum questions, we send all the questions through council first, but you're not voting on whether or not you agree to the question. So it's possible that you're like, no, I don't agree to that, I'm going to vote no, but at the same time you think it's valuable for students to have the option to discuss it, so you agree to put it on the ballot. So we're not arguing whether the question is, like, whether you agree with it, it's just whether you think it's a valuable thing to be on the ballot on the next referendum. So just making that clear. Do we have a second? Tabia and Veronica?
Yeah, so we sent out all of the documentation from CFC. We also have 2 representatives here that will answer any of your questions if you guys do have questions. Yeah.
All right. Are there any questions? Yeah, Kemi?
I do. So for the fee levy, what's your plan like doing with the fee levy? So like, what's your project and stuff that you want?
Is it okay if I just do the presentation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
It's okay.
That's during the presentation. I'll answer some of those questions. Is it okay if I just put this down for a sec?
Yeah, I presume so.
And I understood there was also an HDMI. Alright, so hi everyone. I'm Sebastian Depoy. I'm the internal coordinator at the Concordia Food Coalition, and thanks a lot for having me and my coworker Andrea Reichert. She's the financial coordinator of the Concordia Food Coalition. So what do we do? So for those who don't know, we are we're a fee levy organization at Concordia, and we're concerned with the economic, social, and ecological implications of our food system. Our goal is to create a sustainable and just food system at Concordia University and develop that model that can be replicated at other public institutions. So we do so through a variety of ways. We have working groups that we support, which are essentially student projects that we help incubate through financial support, administrative support, as well as collaborating with other like-minded food groups on campus. And we also have educational events and programming that we put on throughout the year. So one of those are, So one of those is Bite Me Food Week. So that's kind of the CFC's version of orientation. So what we do, we have a series of workshops, presentations, movie screenings, hands-on workshops, panel discussions, all with the objective to educate students and get them more engaged in their food system. Really what the Concordia Food Coalition, our long-term objective is to take over the food system at Concordia and expel the multinational food provider that is currently Aramark. At the time that the CFC was created, it was Chartwell's. We did put a bid in for the RFP. Unfortunately, we didn't get it. Aramark got it, so that's where we stand right now. Back to our educational programming. We have so Bite Me is a staple every single year. We do it at the end of September. Then Concordia Transitions is a follow-up to that. We do that in February, and it's a 2-day or 3-day long conference. It's varied. And that's really has more of a scope of not just the food system at Concordia, but including more examples of broader public institutional food systems and examples that we can draw from that, and as well as other food groups and organizations working in Montreal. Our latest development in educational programming is that we are going to host the 2018 National Assembly for Food Secure Canada. So this was huge for us because Food Secure Canada is really doing very similar work to the Concordia Food Coalition, but of course on a national scale. They're working to create food policy, and it's a pan-Canadian alliance. So every year, or every other year, excuse me. No, sorry, it's every year they do a national assembly. So last year they did in Toronto. We were lucky enough to attend, and so the year after, no, I was mistaken. It was every other year. So 2018 is when we're going to host it in coordination with Concordia University. So these are just some pictures of some of our events. So on the top left, we had an Indigenous food security panel, and we had this man come in, Chef Joel Whiteduck. He came in and gave us a lovely meal for Bite Me. This is Mother Hubbard's. Here we had a collaboration with People's Potato. Bottom left is one of our working groups, Hydroflora. They work to create vertical hydroponic installations. And then on the middle bottom is one of our events this year at Bite Me, where we had an art nook. So other plans this year, I'm not sure if anyone's aware of Mother Hubbard's Cupboard, but it's a food security, food insecurity alleviating initiative that's part of Multi-Faith Spirituality Center. For many years, so it serves a vegan meal every Thursday night throughout the school year at $2 or pay what you can, no one's turned away. And this is really what the CFC is focusing on a lot this year, is trying to scale up initiatives that alleviate food insecurity among students, and this is coming from a study from Meal Exchange that it estimated that I believe roughly a third of students experience some form of insecurity. So what we are doing now this year is we're going through a transition period where it is slowly getting absorbed by the Concordia Food Coalition and not just by Multi-Faith Spirituality Center, with a long-term plan to increase this initiative towards other nights of the school, other nights of the week. Because as it stands right now, outside of dining services, we only really have People's Potato and other cafes like the Hive Cafe. Well, really, these food initiatives are done during the business hours, so 9 to 5. In the evenings, we have very little with regards to good food available and accessible, cheap food for students. So that's really what we're trying to focus on through Mother Hubbard's Cupboard. And Food Memories Community Kitchen is another initiative that takes place also at Multi-Faith Spirituality Center, where we invite students and community members to bring in recipes that reflect their culture and their upbringing. We have a budget for that we received from AVEC. So it's Association de Voix l'étudiant de Québec, c'est ça. Yeah, de l'éducation de Québec, I think it is.
Yeah.
That's right. So that is currently funding our Food Memories Community Kitchen. So anyone can volunteer to be a chef, and they bring their recipe and teach everyone, and then everyone has the meal that evening, as well as meals to take home. So, how have we been successful in the past? So we're currently operating with an 8-cent fee levy, as was outlined previously. Thank you. And so we've had working groups. One of them has been the Hive Cafe, which, as you all know, is now no longer a working group of the CFC. It is its own solidarity cooperative. It does receive some funding from other organizations, namely the CSU, but it has definitely been a success. So this is just one example of how CFC's working groups can graduate. And the next one is the Hudson Heartbeat Community Farm. That's a farm that we allocated funding for this previous year. They're no longer going to be a working group because they were able to achieve other long-term funding as well as success in their first growing season. So we're currently in the works of deciding what our partnership with them will continue to be moving forward, now that they're no longer a working group, so there's more to come on that front. These are just some examples of partners and some collaborators that we work with over the years: Greenhouse, People's Potatoes, Sustainability Action Fund, Food Secure Canada, like I mentioned, and then Dish Project, Frigo Vert, City Farm, Student Food, the Group's Documentary Project, and these are just a few. So just some couple of quick metrics since our inception. So we've supported 18 working groups since we started in 2013. New initiatives and projects that have been just part of the CFC have been 3. One of them was the Concordia Farmers Market, which was a working group as well, but is now, with the help from the CSU, has been, it's now just an initiative of the Concordia Food Coalition. Internships that we've created, these have all been either remunerated internships or accredited internships. And we've had roughly 55 plus workshops, and again, this is me going through all the documentation we have over the past year or two, and then the previous years where documentation was not as structured, let's say. For jobs, we've created 4 jobs. The initial position was split into 2 because the person was taking on a bit too much. Collaborations with other organizations, 10 plus. Number of educational events. These are not including our working groups workshops on their own. These are through our events. It's 60 plus. Amount of grant money acquired. This is only 2016 and 17, as I wasn't able to find information from previous years on grant money acquired. Which just this year alone was 27,000 plus. Educational publications between pamphlets, student food guides. We've had 6 of them. And then this has all been done with basically the equivalent of 1 full-time salaried employee, because we have me working at 15 hours a week, Andre working at 10 hours a week, and our external coordinator, Crystal, working at another 15 hours a week. So needless to say, I believe we've been able to accomplish a lot with a very small budget. And with that, the referendum question, which you're all aware of. I believe you've all seen the budget, so may not be necessary to go through it now, unless anyone has any questions that the budget can answer. So thank you very much for your time. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, yes, Peter?
Yes.
Yeah, just want to know what like, do you guys have any plan for the future? Like, if you do increase those budget, what would you do? Like, is there any specific project or things that you're planning to do?
Yep. Well, first off, as I mentioned about Mother Hubbard's, it's a project that we're slowly absorbing into this year, and part of the fee levy also, well, for part of the referendum question, part of our success with this absorbing of this project hinges a little bit on the fee levy, but we've been able to find funding for that as well. We want to, namely, we want to increase the amount of times that Mother Hubbard serves every week. In an ideal situation, we'd have Mother Hubbard's every single night, and not just out of the Multi-Faith Spirituality Center, but ideally using People's Potatoes Kitchen, and really any other space that we can find. So really, we want to be able to feed the students more, and these increased fee levy would allow us to dedicate more of the coordinator hours, as well as develop more of these initiatives. Excuse me.
I'd like to add one thing, and that is that ultimately we would like to be less reliant on grant monies, which are not always considered, certainly not when it comes to any budget year. So as you saw last year, we received about $27,000 in grant monies. If we receive the increase in the fee levy, we wouldn't have to rely so heavily on internal grant monies, and those monies could go elsewhere to support other projects on campus.
Great, thank you. Are there any more questions for our two presenters on the CFC? Okay, is there any more discussion to be had on the motion on the table? All right, so just a reminder that as per Standing Regulation 260, anything sent to referendum regarding a fee levy requires a 2/3 majority. So that being said, all those in favor of sending this to referendum, please raise your placards. 10, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1. Perfect, so that carries, and I will notify the CEO that that will be going to referendum. Is there any more discussion to be had on the CFC? Perfect, so I'd like to thank our guests for coming and coming all the way down to Loyola.
Pleasure.
Giving the presentation.
Thanks so much for having us.
Okay, so with that, next on the agenda, if there's no more discussion regarding CFC, next on the agenda we have orientation post-mortem. So that's at the end of presentations.
Okay. I'm going to come over here.
Do we want to get food?
Yeah, can we have a recess?
Yep, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, if everyone's amenable to it, we'll take a 10-minute recess, 10 to 15. Oh my god. All right, everyone, we are on the point of orientation post-mortem. So just a reminder, the student life coordinator puts in hours and hours and hours of work on this report, and it is their something or other. Magnum opus, there we go. So please give Layla the attention that this report deserves.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. So first off, this report is very long, and I apologize for that, in that its length is necessary, but I understand that the way that it's created, as in it's written collaboratively by 4 people, means that it's probably longer than it would be if just I wrote it. And that kind of ties into my second quick note, which is like in tone and approach. For me, creating orientation this year, having postmortems from the past 3 years was like invaluable and made a really big difference in both knowing what had worked and not worked in the past, but also what challenges we might face. And there are so many things about planning orientation that I didn't even imagine would be an issue that are. So I really wanted to create this document mainly so that it served its largest purpose, which is to inform the next student life coordinator and not in fact be a document that is purely used for like transparency reasons at the council level, especially because even for those of you who made it through 60 pages, I know that this report has far less meaning than it will to someone who's going to undertake the similar responsibilities I had this year. So for that reason, there's sometimes a more casual tone and also a lot of recommendations for next year written into it. And part of that is reflecting on things that went well or didn't go well this year. But just so that you understand the language and the tone, it's mainly to help for next year. So I realize this is a really long and kind of could be very boring, so I'm going to start with something fun. I'm going to ask you some questions. Maybe you read the report, maybe you didn't, maybe you remember these things, maybe you don't, but if anything, it'll serve to highlight some things about orientation. And more importantly, I have some fun prizes for anyone who'd like to answer, including orientation's tote bag. And I also have 3 of the last orientation mugs, which were a very successful part of orientation as well. So, I'm going to start off with a question, and if it's okay with everyone, this is like a little more informal, and also guests feel free to participate too. What event for orientation had the highest attendance?
I'll let you pick your
let's see.
respondents.
Is it Club Sphere?
It's not Club
I
Sphere. It's not the Loyola Barbecue. Callie?
Angela Davis.
It's not Angela Davis. I'm gonna give Marcus a chance. Marcus?
Community fair?
Wrong. Oh, it's the morning coffee and tea. But
point of personal privilege, that was like 14 different events.
That's not a point of personal privilege.
Had you read the report, you would understand that it fell under one event.
Okay, everyone, we'll try to maintain at least a little bit of decorum. I know, having fun, but...
So, yeah, thank you. Sorry, thank you for allowing me to be a little bit informal in this. So whoever said Angela Davis, Ali, that was you. You get a bag because that was the second. I'm going to give you that after.
Yeah.
This is for Ali, this is for Awa too. That was the second most popular event. We had over 600 people attend the Angela Davis talk. But we had, and this is our way of like guesstimating, we had 300 mugs given out each day at orientation for morning coffee and tea. And each day we got rid of all those mugs and more. And we had 9 days of morning coffee and tea. So that means that we gave out over 2,700, probably closer to about 3,000 cups of coffee to students. So that was our most popular event. Second fun question, how many events were run as part of orientation? Any guesses? There's another mug. There's another mug here. No? You can guesstimate. I'll give you up and down. Patrick?
50.
50? Lower than 50. Jeremy?
15.
More than 15. Rowan?
32.
Less than 32. Eleanor?
29.
Yes!
What? Oh.
Rowan, you get a bag. Eleanor, you get a cup. Okay, last one, and then I'll stop being goofy and tell you some real information. Name at least 2 of the groups that we were in partnership with during orientation. Patrick? We weren't partners with the staff this year. Oh, it's it?
Were you partners with Simone de Beauvoir?
Not this year. Marcus?
Avec and the Center for Gender Advocacy?
We were not partners for AVEC specifically for orientation, but the CJA, yes. No, not you, Veronica. Yeah, Reggie's could be considered a partner, and if you can name one more, you get the cut. Any other group or business or anyone that was in partnership?
This is becoming really long.
Anyone? Okay, I'll let you two fight it out for who gets the mug. Rowan?
Back.
Oh, congratulations. I'll let all 3 of you fight it out for the mug and bag. So yeah, some of our sponsors for orientation this year included the Graduate Student Association, the Center for Gender Advocacy, BEC, who we bought our soda from, Centropole, where we got our coffee, Sucker, Reggie's, and many others in different ways, like sometimes through contributing, sometimes through attending, in which case we could say all the clubs, all the community groups that attended events. So I'm gonna just like talk about the highlights, and then I'll take questions about anything from this document, because I think the highlights are what the most important things are. So some of the most successful aspects of orientation this year were our talk with Angela Davis and Robin Maynard. That was something that I worked on for a large part of the summer to secure her as a speaker, to secure H110 as a location, which involved relocating several classes to a different space and also renting out that space, which is why the Angela Davis event was the largest in cost for all of orientation. It was a really wonderful event. It was really well attended. There was a huge amount of interest. People came out from Toronto to come see her, and people kept asking about tickets even after they sold out online. So that was a really, for me personally, a really wonderful experience in terms of meeting Angela Davis, but also in a large way to organize that as part of orientation encompassed what my vision was for orientation, which was to try something different than a concert and something that would perhaps create more of a bridge between what students are interested in academically or personally at Concordia, outside of like what would be considered completely extracurricular or completely academic. Another event that was really successful was the morning coffee and tea. As I said, it was the most attended. We had CJLO DJ'd a few of them, and we gave out free coffee and tea and our mugs, which were another really big positive of orientation. They're entirely made from rice husks, so they're very sustainable, except for the silicone. And we were able to order like a far larger quantity for a far lower price than any other mug option we had. And it's one of the things that I would highly recommend for next year is ordering with this company because of how low cost they are, of how lightweight they are, and how popular they were. Some other things, all of the events during orientation were free, which I super recommend for next year. So even in the past, most things have been free. Sometimes concert tickets cost money. The orientation budget is really large, and it's really worth creating zero barriers as far as financial means for people to attend these events. It made a really big difference, and in interacting with students and informing them about orientation, all the events being free was a really big draw. So what else? Staff. I had the wonderful opportunity to work with 3 people for the kind of core planning of orientation, Michael, Lena, and Emily, who co-wrote this document with me. They were all 3 really amazing people to work with and made the experience incredibly smooth. All 3 of them have experience within the university or within CSU, which was a huge asset when it came to all of the different bureaucratic aspects of planning orientation that are hard to imagine when you think of it as event planning, but when you get down to things like if you want to close the street, you have to pass the motion to council, and you have to call up facilities to install your banner, but they don't install your banner, they just come and watch you install the banner with another company that you also have to remember to call. It was really great to have 4 people or 3 other people who were really on top of everything and who had a wonderful, wonderful attitude about it all. And then all of the staff we hired as orientation staff and our wastebusters were also really incredible and made a big difference in the atmosphere of a lot of our events, and were super willing to help, especially when things like shifts had to go longer or be canceled. Our food fest was another surprisingly popular event. It was on our first day, so we didn't expect it to do necessarily as well as some other events because there wasn't as much time to do promotion. But the words food and the knowledge that the event is free tends to draw a lot of students, as it turns out, and coordinating with People's Potato was a really great part of that event too. And I would highly recommend it as an event for next year because it also gave a lot of opportunities to incorporate info or communication with other groups that deal with like food sovereignty or food politics that connected really well with the food fest, but also meant they could distribute snacks and information. And this event was kind of a new attempt at having an open air pub, like having a bar on the hall terrace, but also having something else that made the event something worth sticking around and not just an event that was geared around drinking. We also had an open mic here at Loyola, which we did not anticipate being as popular as it was, which was really wonderful. There was quite a nice crowd of mostly people from Res who came and performed. There was a really good atmosphere. We had a really wonderful MC who created a really good environment. And it was a nice place to try out being a little more explicit with the safer space policy, not just having it posted. But Christina, our MC, talked about it during her hosting, and it actually encouraged a student to go review some of his stand-up material with her beforehand. And they decided together that homophobia was probably not something to joke about on stage, and ultimately was a really nice learning moment that wasn't really confrontational or could have been more of a negative experience. So those were some really nice aspects, and it was overall like a really cute, smaller scale event. And it's the one where we actually sold the most drinks, which I think is mostly because a lot of the people who were there were just heading back to Res afterwards, so it was quite a good, safe environment. Both of our fairs were super successful. The community fair got rained out for the 3rd year in a row, so hopefully that won't happen next year. And then we had to move to the 7th floor, which is a really small space to host that many groups. And in the future, we recommend booking one of the atriums as a space for the fair because there's more room. And rain seems to be kind of inevitable apparently in the first week of school. But the club's fair was well attended. It did rain a little bit partway through, but kind of paused and then picked things back up, and it went really smoothly. We had about 10 workshops that were all in the 2nd week, and we made Eventbrite so that people could sign up beforehand. All the workshops, except for one, sold out completely, and we pushed the capacity for a few of them. Unfortunately, and we did know this move going in, but we didn't want to potentially overload the workshops. Not everyone who signs up for a free workshop is going to attend a free workshop. So in the future, I'd recommend overloading the sign up a little more so that inevitably when 50 or 75% of the people who signed up show up, you're not left leading a workshop with 8 people. But even for the workshops where there were smaller amounts, usually the small workshops were for things where there were materials beforehand, so our planter building or beanbag building. and those still worked with smaller groups, and people tended to wander by and join in, which worked really well. One of the last things I'd like to highlight is the student parent barbecue, which we hosted on a Saturday, which is the first time that something has been done on a weekend, to my recollection, probably not ever, but to my recollection. And we did that in partnership with CUSP, which is the Concordia University Student Parent Center, who are wonderful, wonderful people to work with. And this came from a need and an interest in having events on the weekend so that students with families could attend. And just to clarify, the student parent barbecue is not for students to bring their parents, but for students who are parents to bring their children and their families, which turns out we probably should have been clearer about. But we held it in the Grey Nuns Garden, and we had a barbecue and a bouncy castle, and it was surprisingly well attended. A lot of the promotion was left up to CUSP because we don't have a mailing list of student parents, but CUSP does. So that was something where we had to rely on another group to do outreach, but worked really well. And I would really recommend doing that again in the future. A couple things that didn't work out so well, as is wont to happen when you plan 29 events in the span of 2 weeks. Our Ideas Blender, super low attendance, very, I think it was quite unclear to people what the event was, which obviously if you don't know what the event is, you're not going to show up. And I think if that were to happen again, it would have to be done with better planning to involve other groups earlier on, but because this was in the second week and towards the end of the second week, I think most of the orientation team was quite out of steam, so that was one of the less successful events of orientation, but it was also an event that we didn't invest a ton of money into, so that was at least not like a huge loss as far as planning and resources. The one workshop that we had to cancel was the Safer Sex and HIV 101 workshop. We had one person show up, which seemed like a strange and vaguely inappropriate way to hold a workshop as like a one-on-one session. This also was a workshop that was done somewhat in the past. They had a Safer Sex workshop. And the reason in the past sometimes it's not as clear how many people exactly attended a workshop, which is why we wrote literally one in our postmortem so that it's very clear that this workshop is not one to repeat without there being like a sudden big ask for these kinds of workshops. Promotion was really difficult because during orientation all 4 of the core team were so invested in actually putting these events together and making them happen. There were a lot of opportunities for outreach that were missed, and something that I would highly recommend for next year is doing some sort of mail-out campaign to incoming new students. It's a really personalized way to reach out to people, and a big part of people not knowing about CSU orientation is because they receive info from their faculty association orientations way earlier in the summer, and because the timeline that we were handed down and the way that we worked wasn't about getting everything finalized to promote like a month and a half early, but rather like 2 weeks before when people are back in the city, it meant that a lot of people were constantly asking if there was something else going on. So I have a lot of very specific recommendations around promo that are in here and we'll be going to the next person, but a lot of them involve just having someone who has the capacity during the very busy time that is orientation to just step away from the actual putting together of the event and just take some time to promote stuff really heavily on Facebook, to poster really aggressively, to flyer for a lot of people. The events that like our open mic, we flyered really aggressively for like an hour before the event, and I think that's how most people found out about the event. So having someone who could consider that more clearly beforehand would have been a really big help for events that needed a bit of a boost in terms of attendance. And the last event that was less successful was our block party. We still had a sizable amount of people pass by, but because it happened after the clubs fair and it was something that I didn't consider was how dark it would be and how much people wouldn't be inclined to walk up a dark street to go to a mysterious concert at the very top of it. So that was one that, unless you really knew about it, not a lot of people were attending, and also having events in the evening is difficult because people aren't, if they don't know that an event's happening, they're not going to stick around on campus after they finish their class. They want to leave campus. And overall, that's a challenge. Having events that people can drop by are generally the best way to have people come to events rather than having events where people have to like schedule to attend the whole thing. Also, generally, our events with music weren't as successful as our other events, and I think part of that is because people come out to see music that they're, either people go to concerts of bands or musicians that they already know they like and they buy tickets and they do that outside of school, or they would come to a free concert if it was somebody who they recognized and was a really large name. But I think unless someone's willing to invest a lot of money into a really large artist and all of the subsequent costs of having a venue off campus and paying all the technical fees and the riders and things like that, having concerts is not necessarily the way to go, at least from my experience this year. Last thing, some of my biggest recommendations or things that I would note about orientation this year are that morning coffee and tea are the best opportunities to interact with students, to get them to know what the CSU is. And with like a bit more curation, they could become like the biggest like hub. The most students pass by that event, and there are many ways in which, if there had been people there specifically stationed to like interact with people about the CSU, about the services, about getting around the campus, and not just people who are really concerned with making sure percolators were rotating, which was a really big concern. That was just an opportunity that I think was missed, and could be really, there could be money put into designing content for that, like a guide to the best places to eat on campus or something like that that could be distributed there that people could be more interested in. I wrote mixing it up, but I don't know what that means, and that's the strategic direction, so move on. Free food is a really big draw for students to come to events. It's why our food fest was really popular. We charged for food this year, which was what had been done in the past. We made the costs really low. Everything was either $1 or $2. But a lot of people don't carry cash. A lot of people expect food to be free because a lot of other associations have free food. And at our student parent barbecue, we had so much food left over because our bus fare was rained out that we just gave away food, knowing that otherwise it would go to waste. And that was way more successful than any other barbecue. There's definitely the budget to make it happen, so I would highly recommend just giving food away for free. It will increase attendance and participation so much. Also, that it's worth doing less events and having them be high quality, having enough time to think about them, to plan them, not to jam-pack the week. Nobody is desperately waiting for the CSU orientation schedule to come out so that they can like write it all into their agenda. People come to events because they're practical or because they're of interest to them. And I think acknowledging how the CSU orientation functions and in relation to students' lives is a big part of creating events that people are actually interested in attending, excited to attend. I think Angela Davis as an event is a good model for events that appeal to students because they're specific and because it's a large name that people will recognize, that people are willing to set aside the time to go to, and that ultimately was the most successful as far as interest event of orientation. As I mentioned in the report, a lot of the numbers aren't, I'm not able to give completely up-to-date numbers because we're still closing some of our accounts. People are still late sending us invoices. The university is slow at billing because it's all internal, so there's not like a huge rush. So while we came in under budget, exactly how much under budget remains to be determined, but I'll be updating this document so that next year has a clearer idea of how much we spent. But as it stands, when I wrote this report, we were at around $120,000 for all of orientation, and the budget assigned was $140,000. So we're well under. There have been a few costs that have been coming in since then, but I'm very certain that there will be a large amount left over, and some of that can roll over into winter orientation. And our profits for orientation were negligible because we were selling things for below cost. Everything was $1 or $2, so food and alcoholic drinks were $2, and non-alcoholic drinks were $1. Okay, that was a lot of information. I'm here to answer your questions, if you have any.
Yes, Ali?
This is less of a question. This is more of like a recommendation. I've been to a few events, and there seems to be no execs really showing up. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is it's a very good way for promotions. And if every exec shows up and brings some of their friends, at least you can fill up an event. And it's definitely something that should be added to the document for the following year, so they would be present.
I agree. I think it's a big challenge, especially in the first 2 weeks, because execs, like any other students, are figuring out their class schedule and are trying to adjust. And there was a big support from the exec team as far as setting up events and running events. And I think ultimately I would always advocate for more execs being present at events because it's the best opportunity to talk to students, especially that very quickly students develop an opinion of the CSU, and there's not a lot of outreach that the CSU does to exactly offer any other opinion of the CSU other than popular opinion. And orientation is like a large amount of our budget, or not necessarily a large amount of our budget, but it is a large budget line. And it's worth making that budget line worthwhile as far as making students aware of what services we have, making students aware of what recourses they have, and who we are and what we do.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Layla? Any more discussion regarding the orientation postmortem? Okay, so if there's nothing further, just for procedure's sake, can we have a motion to approve the report? Rowan? Okay, second, Ali. All those in favor of approving the report, please raise your placards. 11, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? None. Perfect. Thank you very much, Layla. Thank you for all your hard work. Okay, so if there's nothing further on presentations, we can move to appointments. So we have Loyola committee, it keeps reappearing. Just Gabby's not here, but does anyone want to nominate themselves or someone else to Loyola committee? So we ask every council. Would anyone entertain a motion to table this to after by-elections? That would be my recommendation. Yes, Kemi. Okay, do we have a second? Patrick, all those in favor to tabling this after by-elections, please raise your placards. 9, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1, 2. Perfect, so that carries, and we won't have to put poor Gabby on the spot every meeting. With that, we can move on to 6B, which is CCSL and Veronica.
Yeah, so we have 2 seats open, one from resignation from a counselor, and then the second one was supposed to be for student at large, but I haven't been able, appointments committee hasn't been able to find any student at large. Nobody has been applying for it, so we are going to open it to council.
Yes, Ali?
What does CCSL do?
Yeah, okay. So CCSL is Concordia Council on Student Life. It's a super fun committee. We meet about once a month on Fridays for about 3 hours. We approve different projects, student life related projects. Layla and myself sit on it, so.
All right, is there anyone? I have Rowan and then Peter.
What time does the committee meet?
So our next committee meeting is this Friday at 10 o'clock at Loyola.
Peter and then Rowan.
Yes, just have a quick question though, because we are already on student life, so like, does that mean that is the,
Layla, did you want to respond?
Yeah, just to clarify, this is Concordia's Council on Student Life, not CSU's, so if you want to be on it, you're still able to as someone on student life, but they don't have any relationship.
Thank you.
Oh, and, sorry, just another point to clarify, there are, in fact, there's still another seat that's going to be made available to a student at large, but so that it's being split up. Just to clarify that this isn't being removed from student at large completely.
All right. Rowan.
Is that like the regular time and location for the meetings? Is there a regular time and location for the meetings?
They're posted online. They're typically always on Fridays. So if you don't have class on Friday mornings, perfect council to sit on.
Is there anyone who'd like to nominate themselves or someone else to the Concordia Council on Student Life? Yes, Rowan?
Can we just hold on a sec, because I work on Friday, so I'm wondering if I can make it work. I'm not 100% sure. Unless someone else wants to go for it, sorry.
Would anyone else like to nominate themselves or someone else to the CCSL? Okay. All right. So there's no nominees currently. If you want to bring this back, next council is up to you, but it's not a standing committee, so it doesn't come back automatically. So this can come back or it cannot. But at the moment, there's, yes. Oh, Layla, sorry.
Yeah, so there's a tribunal pool, which is for when there are tribunals regarding academic misconduct and anything similar. There's a student representative that sits on this pool, and typically this is done. There are 14 spots available of 15. There's only one student in the pool currently, so it's very important that there be at least a couple of people appointed immediately, which is why I'm bringing 2 seats to council now. So the other 12 will remain available for student at larges. But if there are 2 counselors who are interested in being on the pool currently, it would help speed up the process of setting tribunal dates, because that's one of the key issues with students waiting to have their date is that it's dependent on the tribunal pool's availability.
Thank you. Rowan?
2 questions. Can you explain what the scheduling for this is like?
It's based on I think it's both based on availability and on, I think someone will propose a time and then anyone in the pool can say if they're available to take it.
Okay. And second question, is there any sort of like special role that counselors would have, or would they just be one of other students at the tribunal?
From my understanding, there's one student that attends a tribunal, but there's a pool of 15 possible students who can go to a tribunal. And a couple of the requirements are that, one of them is that you haven't been prosecuted under the Code of Rights and Responsibilities in the past 3 years, or had any code violations in the past 3 years, I believe.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone who'd like to nominate themselves or someone else? Yes, Veronica?
Also, one requirement is to be in good academic standing.
All right.
Of how?
Do you have Peter?
Yeah, good academic of how much? Just want to make sure.
Layla, do you have a direct?
I'm not sure what the exact GPA is, but if you were in poor academic standing, you would have been notified by the university. It's not like a personal judgment of people above 2.0.
All right, thank you. Rowan?
I nominate myself.
Okay, do we have a second? Kemi? All right. Is there anyone else who'd like to nominate themselves or someone else to the tribunal pool? Yes, Peter?
Yeah, I want to nominate too.
Yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, do we have a second? Kemi? Is there anyone else who'd like to nominate themselves or someone else to the tribunal pool? Okay, oh, yes?
There are 2 seats, right?
The direct?
Because I've been asked to fill this, but typically it would be done through appointments committee. Okay. But because of the short timeline and because finding 14 student at larges is quite unrealistic in my opinion for that role, today I'm suggesting that 2 of those seats be open to counselors and the rest will be made available to student at larges just for the time being.
Is there anyone else who'd like to nominate themselves or someone else? Okay, so if not, oh yes, Layla?
I'm so sorry, this is a crucial piece of information that I should have mentioned before. The term is 2 years, you can resign, but the term is 2 years.
Right, does that change either nomination?
What do you mean by 2 years? Do you mean like the 2 years, like?
So if you're nominated now, you'd be in the pool for 2 years.
Okay.
And if you're not a student for that full time, you could resign, but the commitment is 2 years.
Okay, so that means even if we are part-time, we are still like in the pool for the 2 years.
If you're part-time, you're eligible, but if you graduate or you stop attending Concordia, you can't be in the pool anymore.
All right, is everything clear on the requirements for tribunal pool? Okay, so I'll open the floor to motivations. Rowan, why would you like to be on the tribunal pool?
Yeah, this was something I was interested in doing before it's brought to council. Just in terms of, this is something that I've not directly seen, but indirectly seen abused in a lot of different ways. The way that students have been charged with different things, and having a chance to sit on this tribunal pool and represent student rights in a lot of these kinds of cases is something that I care a lot about and something that I would be happy to do.
Thank you. Peter?
For me, it's also like that I care more about how the students should get their right, and like I have been dealing with a lot of student rights stuff already, so like I know what it should be done and what not should be done. So yeah, so for me it's more that, and also like I have like good academic studies and stuff like that, so it should be okay for me to stuff like that.
All right, thank you. Is there any more discussion to be had on the 2 prospective appointees? Okay, so if not, I just need a motion to either omnibus or approve one at a time. It's up to council. What's it?
A motion to omnibus.
Okay, do we have a second? All right, Tabia. So if there's no more discussion, all those in favor of appointing Rowan and Peter to the tribunal pool, please raise your placards. 8. All those opposed? None. And any abstentions? 1. Perfect. 2. Sorry. So that is good, and congratulations, Rowan and Peter. You are on or in the tribunal pool. So with that, we can move on to SAF. And Layla, the floor is yours.
Yes, so this is from Devon. There's one student from council who gets appointed to SAF, and SAF is a sustainability action fund. So from my somewhat limited understanding, it's about dispersing funds to projects that have some form of sustainable initiative. So in sitting on that, I believe there's also subcommittees that you could be involved with if you were on staff. But there's one seat available for a student, and Devon already sits on it, so you'd be doing that with her.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone who'd like to nominate themselves or someone else? Patrick?
When do they meet?
Layla? I don't know if you can clarify.
Unfortunately, I don't know, but I don't think they have a regular meeting time. I believe it's done based on availability.
No,
yes.
So I just want to be involved. I like that because I was part of sustaining Concordia in the past, the board director, and I want to be part of that.
Okay, so you'd like to nominate yourself? Yeah. All right, so we have a second. Jeremy. Would anyone else like to nominate themselves or someone else to the Sustainability Action Fund? All right, so if not, I'll open the floor to motivation. Patrick.
Basically, I said like I was part of the Sustainment Concordia in the past, I was board director, and then I still want to get involved with it more because I haven't been knowing what's going on, and being part of that, it would be interesting to be part of that.
Right. Thank you very much. Is there any more discussion to be had on the appointment? Okay, so if not, I just need a motion to approve Patrick, to appoint Patrick to SAF. Yes, Jeremy? Okay, do we have a second? Ali? All those in favor of appointing Patrick to SAF, please raise your placards. 6, 7, all those opposed? None, and any abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect, so that carries, and congratulations, Patrick, you are on the Sustainability Action Fund. All right, so with that we can move on to, there's no returning business, 8A, which is letter to CSU, and Veronica, the floor is yours.
Yes. Okay, so I received a letter from Lev Buckman, who is the CEO and founder of Student Care. I'm just trying to pull it up. Yeah, so hopefully you guys had a chance to read it. I think it was sent out.
Yeah, I sent it out.
Oh, I just can't find a letter in my emails. But yeah, so it's just an informational point. He wanted it to be distributed to council. There's no motion to it, so yeah.
Great. Rowan, you had a placard up?
Yeah, I also can certainly not find this. I wanted to address some of the things stated in it, and I'm going to do it off the top of my head, apparently.
Do you want me to upload it to the group?
That'd be great, yeah. Probably a better way to do this.
There we go. Should be there momentarily. There we go.
So yeah, I wanted to comment on some of the language that's used in this, namely the idea of gift versus what's the word, sponsorship? Yeah? Yeah, okay. It is my understanding that for it to be a sponsorship, there would have been some sort of mention of it in the contract or something like that. So I really don't see how this would be considered a sponsorship, and I think it kind of misleads the, like, not to rehash things that have already been discussed at council, but since this letter does bring them up, I think it kind of leads away from the point of the motion, which wasn't to discuss whether or not accepting these gifts or sponsorships or whatever you want to call them was appropriate, but the manner in how it was presented or not presented to council. As well, like I said, I believe sponsorship, like, states that it would be in some form of contract. It's in our contract with ASEC. There is no proper mention. I'm getting a nod. Is that agreeing?
I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
There's no
Yeah,
mention.
that's what I thought. So like, yeah, like I disagree with this letter in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more discussion to be had on this agenda point? All right, thank you, Veronica and Rowan. So if not, we can move on to 8B, which is council meeting minutes. And Awatif, the floor is yours.
Yes, this came to my attention when I was going through the CSU website because I needed something from the resource section, and I realized that the council meeting minutes are not updated. So I just wanted to bring the council's attention and the executive's attention that, as far as I know, we are supposed to upload them there. They haven't been updated since
April.
January, yeah, April, since April, and it would be great if the executive take care of that, given that we're supposed to be accountable to the student body, and if they want to consult with anything or read our minutes, they wouldn't be able to find them there.
Just to clarify, that's not the executive's responsibility, it's
Oh,
mine.
okay.
And I spoke with Omar about it, and I'm going to be sending them to the IT director because when I upload minutes, completely different documents upload. I can't explain why, but I'll either get lucky or not, and it'll upload documents from 2013, and I can't figure out why. So I'm just going to send them all to Jonathan, and he will deal with it. Omar?
Just wanted to clarify the same. Thank you.
Perfect. So if there's nothing further on council meeting minutes, we can move on to 9A, which is ASEC. And Sule, the floor is yours.
Yeah, does everybody want me to do kind of a recap of the situation before I introduce both motions?
If you could just start with the motions, that would be great,
Okay.
please, just so we can open discussion.
Okay, so there's a bit of a recap in the motions anyway. So whereas Omar Riaz and Suleiman El-Alawi, the CSU executives who were overseeing the health and dental plan, are no longer doing so. Whereas Omar Riaz and Suleiman El-Alawi expressed interest on continuing to work on improving the health and dental plan services at the CSU, whereas Veronica Radzewski is now the CSU's representative with ASEC/student care, be it resolved that a working group be formed comprising of Veronica Radzewski, Rowan Godet, Rory Blesdell, Robert Henry, which is the CSU's general manager, Omar Riaz and Suleiman El-Alawi. Be it further resolved that in accordance with the motion passed on September 20th, 2017, that Omar Riaz and Suleiman El-Alawi be allowed to work on improving the health and dental plan but are not allowed to make any decisions on the CSU's behalf. Be it further resolved that this working group's purpose is to come up with recommendations that will be decided upon at council.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Omar, Sule, the floor is yours.
Okay, so y'all remember the September 20th meeting where we discussed basically that what was, yeah. So neither Omar or I have been in contact with student care or ASEC since then. Veronica's been our representative. The working group, and I should have amended the motion, but the idea is that it's an open group for any counselors to join in on helping improve the health and dental plan services, which is, as per our contract with ASEC, something that we can do. Yeah, so something that we noticed is within the contract is that we can take in some of the services that ASEC/student care provides and bring them in-house, which would not only create jobs for Concordia students, but also reduce the expenses on the health and dental plan that we have to pay to ASEC every semester or every year by about by over $100,000. So we'd be saving the CSU about $100,000 that we can then use for other projects, and yeah, that's basically it. So if there's any discussion, questions, amendments.
Ali?
Where would the salaries of the students come out from?
Direct.
The salaries of the students, so that would be the money that's saved from the expenses would go to paying salaries for students, and that's something that the working group would be looking into, like the proper implementation for it. So this isn't like taking any decisions. It's really just like doing the research together, right? And like having the working group talk with ASEC, which is in the contract that we're allowed to do. And then whether or not it's feasible, then we'd bring it up at council and make a decision in this room.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
Yeah, there's no question for the. Are you still only talking about full-time student, or what are you planning for the whole thing? Like that, this also will apply to the part-time and full-time both are all only full-time only.
So do you mean in terms of the jobs created, or do you mean in terms of
both,
like
both the money and the job created? Are you also providing to the student who are part-time?
Right. So again, this is just a very big picture stuff, and nothing's been decided or recommended. And that's the purpose of this working group, is to figure out how or whether this is feasible, doable.
Great. Thank you, Ali.
I had another question. Why is it that a one-student job, like a one-person job, which is now Veronica's job, becoming a working group?
Oh, well, the idea for the working group really was because Omar and I really wanted to work on improving these services, right? And we figured, and having spoken with the rest of the execs about this, we brought up the idea of a working group. It was favorable. I had spoken about it with Rowan and Rory as well, and they thought it was a good idea. So I figured I'd bring it up to council, see what everybody else thinks, whether some councillors want to help out as well. If it gets shut down, that's fine too. And then, I mean, it's council's decision at the end of the day.
Great, thank you. Yes, Ali.
Can I direct a question at an executive?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
As long as you state which one.
Yeah, Veronica. How do you feel about this?
Do you have a direct response?
About the committee?
Well, whether the committee is needed.
From my understanding, it is needed, just because we have to look into, looking into in-house versus outside of ASEC is necessary and maybe a good idea. So, yeah, it's necessary.
Great, thank you. Is there any more discussion to be had before we move to a vote? Okay, so all those in favor of the motion as read by Soule, please raise your placards.
Point of information.
Sorry, yeah?
Before we move on, do any other councillors want to be on this working group? I mean, it's a flexible thing, but just the way that the motion is written, it doesn't sound open, and I'd like for someone maybe to amend it to keep it open for anybody who wants to join. If that's all right?
Yes, Sally?
Can you propose a good amendment, since you're the one who wrote it?
So, where it says, be it resolved that a working group be formed comprising of, and then it states the members, I'd like to add after Omar Suleimani, and any other councillors that wish to be a part of this process.
Okay, can I have a second? Awetzif, can this be considered friendly? Perfect. So we don't need to discuss. Yes, Ali?
Can it not be any councillor who wants to be part of this? So if everyone here wants to be part of it, it's going to be hectic. Can you give a maximum?
What would you recommend? I don't know. Or what would someone recommend?
Rowan?
I mean, the problem I see with that is first of all, forgive me if I'm mistaken, but I feel like all of council isn't going to be showing up to health and dental plan committees when we have about half of council in the room right now. Second, I think normally when we're looking at limiting the amount of councillors to sit on the committee, it's decided by councils, where you have something that's kind of a drop-by basis. Having a number where it's the first 3 people in the door get to come and the others don't is kind of iffy. I think worst case scenario, if it does get larger and larger, you just kind of have more informal, aka introduce Robert's rules more and more into the discussions as the group gets larger, which is kind of standard practice anyways. But I wouldn't recommend actually setting a limit on something like this.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there any more discussion or amendments to the motion? Yes, Peter?
Yes, just now when you say about the process, what do you mean? Do you mean the whole thing with...
Do you want to clarify, Sule?
Yeah, sorry.
When you say about the process, do you mean the whole thing with how to make this thing work?
So basically, the idea is to look at, because within the agreement that was signed last year, there's a possibility for the CSU to bring in a portion of the services in-house and administer them themselves, right? And so that it would be like to do the research to see whether A, that's feasible, whether it's worth it, and then if it is feasible and worth it, then figure out a timeline on how to do it. But like no decisions would be made without council's approval. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yes, Jeremy?
Can I direct a question at council?
Yeah.
So I don't understand your logic in not putting a cap on this group.
Right, do you have a direct?
Yeah. Essentially, my problem with it is where it's kind of like it's not formally adding counselors. It's like more drop by, like any other counselors who want to come in are welcome. It's like when it's formally adding, you have council decide which counselors can and cannot sit on a committee. When it's kind of like drop by, there's no real mechanism, in my mind at least, unless you can think of something, to say like when these counselors start showing up who can and can't sit on something, and where this is more informational and has no decision-making authority. Like I don't really see a problem with suddenly having a new counselor added to a committee and then dropping off for the next meeting, etc.
Did you have a follow-up, Jeremy?
For Sule.
Okay. Just because like I like the idea of like, you know, drop in whenever, and like if you can't make it, you can't make it. But I feel like in order for us to be like productive, there should be like at least like a core group, and then whoever wants to keep adding on. That way, like, you know, if we like try to have a meeting, it's not just like, you know, a couple of execs showing up and maybe one counselor, and then we're not really sure like how to move on or stuff like that. But rather like, I guess, so the core group I would suggest is the one outlined in the current motion. So the people who are already approached about it and who already voiced interest in being on it. And then if any other counselors want to be a part of the core group. Yep.
Can we amend this to saying...
Oh, sorry, Jeremy was next on the speaker's list,
sorry.
actually. Sorry.
I understand.
Oh, okay.
Can we amend it to say that it's the same 3 executives, but then 2 council members, for example, on the working group, and then we can appoint the 2. I mean, the 2 on the group. I personally don't have.
Okay, we currently have an amendment on the table, which was to open it just to councillors in general. So do you want to specify that amendment, like not specify, to amend that amendment?
Yeah, I want to amend it and make it just 2 councillors, like give a number to councillors and we appoint them basically or whatever, and then whoever we appoint, I guess the 2 on the list, we have permission to appoint them, whether they're here or not. So.
Okay. Do we have a second for the amendment? So it's amending from any councillors to be 2 specified councillors and then appoint them at council. Yes. Was that a second? No. Okay. Okay. So we have a second for that. It's your motivation then, because I can see that it's not going to be considered friendly.
Yeah. The reason is basically that if we want to create a base for people to actually show up, and some people who would know all the information when they go in and all that stuff, it's better if it's kind of like a committee that everyone who's responsible to go should go. And I mean, if anyone else wants to go, I don't see why we shouldn't necessarily not allow it, but like we should at least have, you know, some sort of understanding who's supposed to be there or who's actually supposed to work all the time on that or whatever.
Okay, so I have a speaker's list of Jeremy and then Awazio.
There you go.
You want, yeah.
I understand.
Okay.
I think through the discussion that's been happening here that we're trying to create some sort of infrastructure to this committee or group, and both me and Jeremy find it not clear, and policy committee has already worked on making structure to some committees, and I recommend that if we are to create some sort of a structure to this committee to know who is to be there and what kind of role they'll be taking in this committee, this has to go to policy for policy committee to work on it and send it back to council.
Thank you. Layla?
I just want to clarify that I think what was originally in the motion, that this is a working group, not a committee, so it doesn't have decision-making power. So while I think considering who's in the committee is important, a working group usually doesn't have decision-making power. The idea is that it would come to council with recommendations if a decision needed to be made. So I don't think it's necessarily as important as with a committee to decide on the structure really explicitly. I think what would be most useful and most efficient here would be to decide on a number of seats for council on this working group that maintains a manageable size of people that can get things done. And then for however many people want to nominate themselves to be on that committee should do so, and we select the amount of people who want to be, or sorry, I say on that working group, and then we should decide who's on that working group, and then they should get to work so that this isn't like an ongoing discussion, because I think the goal is actually quite clear. It's to do work associated with ASEC that can't necessarily be entirely taken on by an exec, and where having council input would be useful and would facilitate bringing decisions to council.
Great, thank you. I have Rowan and then Jeremy.
Yeah, I agree with what Layla said. Like, I don't think with a working group it's necessary to create a whole structure. That being said, like, if council wants to discuss who's going to sit on it from council, I am more than happy to have that discussion, and some sort of like a bit more structure in sense of like adding seats or something along those lines. I think I'm fully open to, but yeah, I think this needs to go to policy committee or anything like that.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I mean, yeah, just to echo what Layla and Rowan said, like, I don't think it's productive or necessarily appropriate to discuss that right now in council, you know, just to appoint 2 councillors. And it does seem like there's, like, at least on my part, there's vagueness in terms of what's going into these 2 positions and what this working group is mandated to do. So I think it should go to policy.
Okay, so there's a lot of repetition going on. We do have an amendment on the floor to specify the number of councillors to 2 on the committee. Yes, Ellie? You can't rescind because it's been seconded. So if nobody else has anything to say, all those in favor of the amendment proposing 2 councillors, please raise your placards. Okay, so that's 0. All those opposed? 5. All those abstaining? 6. Okay, so the amendment fails and we're back on the main motion. Since there's no speakers list, we were actually about to do a show of hands of who might be interested to sit on the committee, so that might make things go a little bit faster. If anybody can just show of placards who may or may not be interested. Yeah, Sule? Not on the committee, sorry, who'd be interested in attending the working group. Because that was the last thing that was said before an amendment was proposed.
Yeah, so the amendment failed.
Yeah.
That means the motion only says that it's Sule.
Open to councillors.
No.
It was
The original motion is Veronica, Rowan, Rory, Robert Henry, who's the CSU's GM, and Omar and Sule.
But then a motion was proposed to have it open to councillors, and then that, an amendment was proposed for that, and then that amendment was proposed to be amended to specify the number of councillors. So we're on the first amendment, yeah. And someone had asked a show of placards who might be interested on sitting on the committee for numbers' sake before we had moved into that. Yeah, Sule?
People want me to clarify what the point of this working group is, in terms of like how Omar and I had seen like the steps or like the objectives of it being when we were still representatives for the CSU before everything happened? Yes? Okay. So the idea, once we found out that we could bring in the services in-house, right, and like that's something that we saw when we went to the conference in Vancouver, is that the AMS also has in-house services, so they like take action on what was said in the in their contract with ASEC, and so we wanted to see how it was administered, and like they're saving money, but they're also creating like students' jobs. They have a bunch of students going in there every day, so there's a demand for it in terms of their student population. So the idea of this working group is to see if this could be integrated with the CSU, right? So like assessing the demand for students to have an on-site service where they could come in and ask their questions for their health and dental plan, because right now they like have to call ASEC or go through the website. It's kind of convoluted. So we found through our talks with the AMS people that it's beneficial to their students because like it's on campus and they can have like a face-to-face conversation instead of having to go to ASEC's offices or go through their weird website, call them, etc. So it's that, but also assess. So once that need is assessed, if there is a need, assess the feasibility of bringing in the stuff in-house. So how much room would we need? How much it would cost to do the training? how much it would, how many employees would be necessary, how all the like cost structure of it, but also like some other like data analytics in terms of the back end. How do we make the service more efficient, stuff like that. And once that's established, bring recommendations to council for how to move forward. Is that clearer? If there's more questions, like I'm happy to answer them, or if other execs want to jump in.
List of Omar and then Jeremy.
Iverson.
Okay, Jeremy.
I think I was with Harrison. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any more discussion to be had on, yes, Omar?
Well, I think just the reason why we should look into start bringing these services in-house is because very often not only does the receptionist, not only do the receptionists receive a lot of inquiries about these services where they have to be directed to go online or call in, but I also do get several emails throughout the course of this semester about people that would like more information about the health and dental services, and they have to be referred to someone on the phone, which is not always the best service and the most convenient thing to do for students.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy?
So you've already calculated that it would be cheaper than to bring in these services in-house as opposed to having them outsourced to ASEC?
So I don't have the contract in front of me, but I do remember, if I'm allowed to direct respond.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's 4 services that ASEC provides for its health, and the same 4 services that it provides for its dental, right? We have the option of taking on 2 of these services for both the health and so 2 of each, and each service has a fee associated to it. So I think the total amount, I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't want to like lead you into like a. But we did make the calculation as to just like in general, like with an assumption of this many students that use the healthcare and dental plan, we'd be saving per student this amount of money. So we multiplied that and saw how much money we'd be saving per semester per year, right? And it was a substantial amount. Like it was over $100,000. So part of the assessment would be to see how much money we'd actually save, and how much money it would cost, and see whether it's like worth it.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was going to say the salaries that the students that would be working in this in-house initiative have been calculated into this then.
Not yet. That's why we want to.
I understand. Okay.
Roy?
I can answer some of that in broad terms with no specific numbers. From my time on the RFP Health and Dental Plan Committee last year, we did do some simple number crunching, and essentially what insurance providers do, and this is by no means limited to ASEC or any other insurance provider, is they kind of have their own phone operators, and then they don't, you're not directly paying that salary, you're just giving them a lump sum of money, and it's more than it would be if we just gave someone a salary ourselves, and you can pretty clearly calculate that, and I don't remember if we had specific numbers or not, but it was we asked for in the RFP breakdown of where the money we'd be giving them going, and in that breakdown included the amount of money that we're going towards customer service, so that person, and it was very obvious that we could provide the same service from someone hired by the CSU for much cheaper, and have them be a student or students, etc.
Thank you. Ellie?
No, I understand.
Okay. Is there any more discussion to be had? Yes. Abed?
Just a quick question. How we will save this money? If this new student is working?
Oh, I'm making a calculation right now, so I'll give you an idea.
Okay.
But for the process, essentially we're paying ASEC money right now to provide the service for us.
Okay.
And so if we do it ourselves, then Sule has numbers that I'm sure will show that we will pay less if we just directly administer it ourselves instead of outsourcing the labor.
Okay, I know we all have answers to the questions, but it's getting into a lot of back and forth here, and it's getting a little bit complicated. So just remember, if we could try to please stop using you and address our questions to a specific person, that'd be great. Sule?
Okay. So I've built basically just separate equations on some assumptions, right? The first one would be how much money we'd save, assuming that only 20,000 undergraduates use the health and dental services, and that they pay $7 per year per student. So we'd be saving over $140,000, right? The next thing is how much it would cost for salaries for students, right? So assuming that we have 4 students working during the week, So 2 of them 20 hours a week, 2 of them the other 20 hours a week to have like a full 40, right? At $15 an hour for 52 weeks, we're at $62,400 for their salary. So you take the first one is how much we're saving minus how much their salaries cost, and we still have over $70,000 that we save.
Great, thank you. Jeremy?
But that's just in salaries. That's not taking into account the infrastructure that goes into making this happen, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if I
Jack,
could Derek respond. So there would be costs into bringing it in-house, but the idea isn't to look at like the 1 year effect, but like over time, like I can see this making not only substantial savings, but also just creating opportunities for students.
Okay. Great, thank you. Omar?
Just to add that obviously there's a lot of good questions, but those are the reasons why we want to create this group, to be able to do the research, to be able to provide that information more concretely. And it's not only about the numbers as to how much we're saving. Like I think in the first year we'll be able to save enough money to actually pay for the infrastructure and whatever space we'll have to renovate accordingly. But it's to also see the value in the improvement in the service that the students will see. So you'll have better access to the service by being able to go and see someone to get the information instead of having to run around and not actually even, in the end of it, claiming your medical expense.
Thank you. Is there any more discussion to be had? Yes, Ahmed?
Just a quick question. What will be like the responsibility of this new students? Like,
Omar?
Yeah.
So first of all, like they'll be interacting physically with the students, like face to face. Because right now, just to give you an example of what's happening, if you have, let's say, medical an expense that you want to claim, you have to go online, fill out in the app, and then attach the document. That goes to ASEC, which then is, you know, the middle person between the student and Desjardins, who's actually the insurance company, and then they process the claim. If you need any questions, you'd have to call them, and they do have the information to provide that to you. But not only are there wait times and other problems in that process, if it is in-house, they'll be able to come and see the person right away who would have access to track your claim as if it's been seen by Desjardins. If it has been refunded, how much of it will be reimbursed and so on.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder, we're discussing the amendment, which is to add "and counselors" to the motion. So if we could just kind of stick on topic for a little bit. I know that everyone has questions about the motion itself, but right now we're amending to add whether or not counselors should be, or how is it worded again?
So it's the core group that was mentioned before of Veronica, Rowan, Rory, Robert, Omar, and Sule, as well as any other counselors that would like to be a part of it.
Yeah, so we're just talking about whether to add "and any other counselors who'd like to be a part of it" to the motion.
Yep.
Can that, yes, Sule?
So I'd like to make a quick recommendation, just because like the whole purpose of this working group is to do the research first to be able to provide the information. Because like right now we're getting a lot of questions as to like what's going on, the money, all that. We don't have the answers because the research needs to be done. So that's the whole idea of the working group, is to assess, you know, feasibility, cost, all that, and whether it's worth it. So just keep that in mind.
Great, thank you. So is there any more discussion to be had on adding counselor and any interested counselors to the motion? Yes, Ali? Yes, yeah, if there's no more discussion.
Should I reread it, or?
No, it's not the motion. We're just doing the amendment right now, so it's to add "and any interested counselors" to the motion. So all those in favor of adding that amendment, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1, 2. Perfect. That works.
3.
Oh, 3, sorry. My apologies, didn't see you there. All right, so that carries, and now we're back on the main motion. So, yes, Sally? There's no one on the speakers list currently. Yes? Yeah. Do you want to reread the motion?
Yeah, with the amendment, it says, whereas Omar Riaz and Suleiman El Alawi, the CSU executives who were overseeing the health and dental plan, are no longer doing so, whereas both Omar Riaz and Suleiman El Alawi expressed interest on continuing to work on improving the health and dental plan services at the CSU, whereas Veronica Radzewski is now the CSU's representative with ASEC/Student Care, be it resolved that a working group be formed comprising of Veronica Radzewski, Ron Godet, Rory Blaisdell, Robert Henry, the CSU General Manager, Omar Riaz, and Suleiman El Alawi, as well as any other counselors that would like to be a part of it, which was the amendment. Be it further resolved that in accordance with the motion passed on September 20th, 2017, that Omar Riaz and Suleiman El Alawi will be allowed to work on improving the health and dental plan, but are not allowed to make any decisions on the CSU's behalf. And be it further resolved that this working group's purpose is to come up with recommendations that will be decided upon at council.
All right, yes, Sally?
So what you want to do is do the research, right? That's
The
what you want to do.
research
That's the,
and present
that's,
to council.
okay.
Okay, is there any more discussion to be had on the motion? All right, yes, Ali?
Does that mean that you guys are going to be in contact with the...
No, so the idea is that really like Omar and I have already like started doing the research like before the previous motion was passed, right? So it'd be translating that information as well as assessing the feasibility from the CSU's end. So we wouldn't have any contact with ASEC Student Care, and that's why, you know, Veronica Radzewski's, Rory, Rowan, etc. Like that's why they're there, is to really do that front as well as the CSU stuff, and we're here as a support, because we really just want, like, in both of our work plans for the year, like that was like a big chunk of it was to work on the health and dental services, and like, yeah.
Omar?
I think there would be communication between ASEC and this working group, but through Veronica, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's important for her to be there. I think the working group will come up with certain questions as to how this could be possible, how much it would cost, where they could do it, and the services that we would need. I think that would be information that would be requested to ASEC, but through Veronica.
Alright, thank you. Okay, so if there's no further discussion on the motion, was that to discuss or to vote? Okay, all those in favor of the motion as read and amended, please raise your placards. 9, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1, 2, 3. Perfect, so that carries. Yes, Marcus? Okay. So if there's nothing further, Marcus actually has to leave. Oh, Marcus is next. So.
There's a second ASEC motion.
Oh, there's a second ASEC motion.
But, I mean, I don't mind doing it after Marcus's presentation.
Are you amenable to doing it now?
We also take a brief. I'm just kidding.
All right.
In the meantime, there is some coffee, if anyone wants.
Sorry, I just put you in substantive because you asked specifically.
Yeah, but I figured because it's present, like it has a motion.
Yeah, just next time ask to be a presentation.
Definitely do that, but there also won't be a next time.
Okay, now or never.
Yeah. So I don't have moving.
No.
Alright.
I double and triple checked it.
Okay, so
you can put the motion on the screen.
I ask that someone move to give me moving rights, which isn't voting rights, it's just moving rights. So I can
It's
move
in
next
the
one.
bylaws.
Oh, really? Okay,
yes.
well, I'll just read out this motion and then maybe somebody can actually
just-
put it on the table.
Just to clarify what's going on, only executives and counselors can make motions. I double and triple check this in the bylaws today. So someone would have to move it for an external member. Yes, Omar?
I think if it's alright with you, you read the whole thing and we could just read the be it resolved part.
Okay.
Because
Or
you'd be able
you
to
can
read the
just read
whereas.
it and then somebody can
Oh,
say,
right.
I move that.
Okay.
All right.
If you agree with it, obviously.
So procedurally, I'm going to start with the motion, and then I'll go into the presentation, and I'll keep it quick and concise, because obviously. Whereas students adopted the following motion through referendum in the by-elections of November 26, 2015. So do you, as a member of Concordia Student Union, support the CSU employing its resources, including a portion of the Student Space Accessible Education and Legal Contingency Fund, to establish an autonomous Concordia-based solidarity economy incubator that will primarily engage students through the support, development, study, and promotion of democratic enterprises? Whereas the Concordia Student Union is an organization mandated to service the student body and advocate for student interests at all levels. Whereas research produced by the General Undergraduate Survey, the results of which were presented to CSU Council in the regular meeting of October 11, 2017, showcases gaps within students' educational experience and perceived employability between faculties at Concordia. Whereas the Concordia Student Union has a history of incubating major successful enterprises to the benefit of the student body, including the current examples of the Hive Cafe and Ready's Bar, and the upcoming examples of the Student Housing Cooperative and CSU Daycare. Whereas the development of a social economy incubator by the CSU would constitute a direct investment into student innovation by the union, improve the educational experiences of Concordia students, and create unparalleled opportunity to foster social enterprises at the undergraduate level. Be it resolved that the CSU Council reaffirm its support for the creation of a social economy incubator. Be it further resolved that the CSU allocates $60,000 from the Student Space Accessible Education and Legal Contingency, or SILC Fund, subject to the approval of the SILC Fund Committee as per Special Bylaw J, towards the creation of the Social Economy Incubator pilot project as outlined in the documents presented to Council. Be it further resolved that the CSU approve and mandate the funding of $35,000 from the Student Endowment Fund via the Dean of Students Office towards the creation of the Social Economy Incubator pilot project as outlined in the documents presented to Council. Be it further resolved that the coordinating staff and skeleton board of the pilot project for the incubator collaborate to deliver midterm and final reports to CSU Council to monitor the progress of the incubator initiative, and with the template and timeline of the report subject to approval by CSU Council in the regular meeting of December 2017. Can someone please move that?
Awatif? Okay, do we have a second? Patrick, I'll give the motivation to Marcus.
Okay, thanks everybody for getting through the motion. It's formal, obviously. So I was supposed to present with 3 other people. 2 of them were counselors, Michaela and Charlotte, who were not able to attend for reasons that I believe you've been made aware. And the other one was originally going to attend until we found out, unfortunately, that we will be at Loyola today. So the Social Economy Incubator Project, I'm just going to quickly present on this. So firstly, as I wish most profs would do when they present, there's a table of contents here so you can sort of figure out where we are. So I'm first going to go over the pilot project as a whole, following the guidelines set up here. So what is a social economy incubator? First of all, the content of the pilot project, timeline, budget, long-term vision. Then I'll go over the relevance to the CSU in terms of the CSU's relationship to the social economy, the research that was produced, and the referendum mandate that was referenced in the motion, and then we can go into question period. I'd also just, for transparency's sake, like to say that I tried to reach out to as many counselors as I could beforehand, because I understand this is, a fairly large project and there's a lot of questions that could come up. But also, obviously, please level them at me here. That's what I'm here for. Okay, part 1, pilot project. So what is a social economy incubator? It is a business startup organization, essentially. Social economy one would specifically be geared towards creating non-for-profit and cooperative businesses. So social economy, in other words, it's more of an anti-capitalist initiative. The content of the pilot project, so what this proposal is about is funding a pilot project that would go for a 1-year period, after which we would assess where we are and possibly approach the CSU for full funding through referendum through a number of different means, likely through the fee levy system, but it could also be incorporated as a CSU service in the same way the Advocacy Center, LIC, and HOJO are, or it could be externally contracted. There's a lot of different ways it could go down. That will be determined throughout the course of the pilot project, largely by the coordinating staff. But the content of the project, there's 2 major pieces that it will offer. The first being free professional level workshops of key aspects of key fields that any business startup would require in order to reach maturity. And the second one being paid research internship positions. So I'll briefly go over those. The workshop series, 2 workshops, they'll run concurrently, firstly in the winter and then in the fall semester, and they'll cover these 2 topics, so nonprofit financial management and data science and coding. So we do have a pool of, we're taking this pretty seriously. We have a wide network of people that are involved. There's a lot of people also working on this project, and we do have a pool of candidates for some of the positions, including the data science and coding workshop. So the person we have in mind for that one would be Mohammed Idris, who is also the person that ran the analysis and created the survey application that I presented on at your last meeting. He's a postdoc researcher at Concordia. He's done research for Penn State University and Harvard University, and he has engaged in a number of different projects using the languages he'd be teaching. So these are workshops that would be given to free to undergraduates largely. Internship series, it has two major purposes. So these are this is just a summary of what's actually in the proposal that was distributed, but there's two major purposes for the internship. The first and the most obvious one is to give students hands-on experience in conducting research for relevant community matters. The other purpose would be to use this research to help guide the later stages of the incubator. So financial mapping of Concordia University economic opportunities, previous feasibility and market analysis. It's pretty obvious how this kind of information would come of use to any students that have a budding social enterprises they want to build up. So the timeline, the launching of the workshop series for the winter semester would be January 2018. The launching of the internship series for 2018 would be in February. The referendum campaign for full organization and seed funding could potentially happen in March. I'll go over that in a little more detail. The development of the incubator structure and permanent board positions would happen in June, and the launching of the workshop series for the fall semester would happen in September. So yeah, I'm going to go over the referendum and the seed funding in a little more detail later in the presentation. Also, if anybody has any questions throughout, we can just keep them to the end, but if they're pressing, come at me. So I'm just briefly going to go over the budget. I don't want to go through it line by line. You can see it here, but it's a pretty basic breakdown. Office, outreach, workshop, expenses, and facilitator contracts. Second half of the budget here, coordinator compensation, guest lecture series, and student leadership development internship series. So the total cost of the pilot for a year's operating is $165,100. The revenues are broken down here. You can see how the student endowment fund and SILP funding comprises just over just over 2/3 of the funding. The rest would come from Sustainability Action Fund, social economy sector, external to Montreal, the philanthropic sector, external to Concordia, sorry, philanthropic sector, external to Concordia, the Faculty of Arts and Science, where we have some connections that are interested in helping to fund the workshop series, and the CCSL, which we'll be presenting on Friday. Here's a visual breakdown of that, so yeah. So as I mentioned, we do have a pretty wide network of stakeholders that is involved in this project, both on the Concordia and Montreal level, as well as on a national to international scale, and by international I just mean the States. Executive Director, so Esteban Kelly, I actually don't know either of these people, but they're within the networks of those who are working on this. So the Executive Director of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, board member of the Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, which is the biggest cooperative network in Canada. Joe Holtz, who is the co-founder and general coordinator of the Park Slope Food Co-op Initiative, which is arguably the most successful grocery cooperative in the world, operating out of New York. And I'm not sure what the English translation would that be, general direction, and members of the Chantier de l'Économie Sociale, which is a major funding body in Montreal that deals with cooperatives and also contributed to the student housing cooperative. Okay, so coming back, when I mentioned the referending and the full funding with the CSU, so the long-term vision is it's centered around the 3 pillars. So I mentioned the workshops, so there's also the internships and networks that I mentioned, but the last and one of the most important pillars is project funding. That isn't actually a part of the pilot project because obviously we'll have limited resources. It's only for a year. But the aim of it is to tie it into the SILP fund. And the way that would work, one of the questions that we would ask the student body and develop is if students would be interested in taking the investments of the SILP fund, which currently stands at $8 million, divided among 2 portfolios, Jarlowski Fraser and Lesser Asset Management. It's invested in SRIs, and the plan for the referendum question would be to ask if students are interested in using the interest from these investments to go towards startup funding for social economy initiatives. This kind of reflects the circularity of the social economy, because what it would essentially be is you would have $8 million of student money that was invested into SRIs via referendum, and the interest would be used to fund student social economy initiatives. It kind of follows from the divestment campaign in a way, that you take the money that otherwise would be like sitting in bank accounts or invested in, you know, questionable industries, and reinvest that directly into sustainable industries and student innovation. It's also notable that cooperatives and other social economy projects have been shown to have generally lower impacts when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and other metrics. Okay, so part 2, relevance to the CSU. It's pretty straightforward. So the CSU has a rich history of working with social economy projects. Like everybody in the room is aware with all of the ones that are currently listed. So the Hive Cafe Solidarity Cooperative is an obvious one. I'm on the board of the Hive Cafe. It's currently running a surplus, which is a term we use as opposed to profit, after grants, which is in a really good position, and becoming an organization that can actually be replicated and move outside the university model. The student housing project is coming in 2018. You've all been briefed about that pretty repeatedly, I imagine. Reggie's Bar Solidarity Cooperative, despite some hiccups that I know have been voted on at this level, I think overall it's a pretty good model. And the student daycare project is also coming along, and I'm sure you're all, again, familiar with that, so moving on. So the research that the general undergraduate survey showed that there is gaps in students' perceptions of their educational experiences as well as their perceived employability. This is strongest when you look at faculty breakdowns. So I think when it comes to JMSB and engineering and computer science, they tend to rate their communication and relationships with their professors lower than any other faculty. And when it comes to employability, or at least perceived employability, the faculties of fine arts and arts and science tend to rate lower than the other faculties, and low in general. So it's pretty obvious to see how an incubator would be able to address some of these needs. Firstly, because in order to address the employability, it's a really easy way to take student projects, budding social enterprises, and channel student money into them to accelerate them beyond what their normal capacity. And with engineering and computer science and JMSB students, you'll notice that the workshop series, one of them is on nonprofit financial accounting, which is something that I would imagine there's courses within JMSB for, and the other is on data analysis and coding using R, which is something I hope is offered in engineering and computer science, but they offer a more hands-on approach, a much smaller workshop class size, and would also allow sort of the deliverable at the end. We're trying to figure out how it can turn out like tangible products so that people have something to show for it. This is the second last slide, by the way, don't worry. And the referendum mandate. So in 2015, yeah, this was voted on. So I like to think of it as essentially two mandates going into it, the first being the referendum mandate, the popular mandate, and the second one being the mandate from research, an empirical mandate. That's the way I like to think about it. So anyway, so that's the relevance to the CSU, and now we can go into question period. There was a couple questions that I got. I communicated the proposal to the executive last week, so I'm just going to address those now. Okay, one of the questions I think I've answered, so which was, would it be better to incorporate it as a service with the CSU? And I think that's definitely a possibility. I think that, as is stated in the motion, because this is something that we'd be working closely with the CSU on, we do want to make sure there's sufficient oversight, so we want to develop reports in collaboration with the CSU and figure out how the progress is going and allow it to be tracked via council. Where will the ongoing funds come from that are required to fund the incubator? Well, yeah, this is the pilot project, so this is just strictly from grants, and then the full organization would likely be approached through the fee levy system, depending on how well the project works. The full list of stakeholders, I've mentioned a couple in one of the slides. I can mention many more, both internally and externally. We generally don't want to make the full external list public just because it's somewhat sensitive. We don't want to make fully explicit the network of people within cooperatives because there are other projects within Concordia that would find that of particular use who we could be in competition with considering our fairly explicit anti-capitalist mandate. And general progress of the report, yeah, so that's outlined in the final motion there. But that being said, I'm sure there are many more questions and I'd be really happy to answer them.
Are there, yeah, Sule.
In terms of the stakeholders, because I believe I raised that question at some point, I didn't want to know like specific people, but more in terms of like specific groups. So like obviously Concordia undergrads, but I assume also maybe some graduate level at other schools maybe as well, or.
For schools, not so much yet because it is Concordia, like we're Concordia focused. If this was to get off the ground, become the full organization, then like the scalability there, it could definitely go to different schools. But for now, we are focused on the Concordia community. But in terms of the list, like externally in groups, just quickly bring that up. Yeah, so Executive Director of U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, people with over 35 years of cooperative development experience, founder and CEO of Peer-to-Peer Alternatives, Executive Director of Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, Communications Director of Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, Board Director, etc. So it's a good list of people who have been in contact with various stages for the project. And yeah, I think that like internally, we also do have like professors who are working on it. So Satoshi Aikida, for example, has been an extremely helpful faculty member of the project, and Mohammed Idris, who's like a postdoc researcher and previously offered courses as well. And we will be approaching the Faculty of Arts and Science, specifically the psychology department, who's expressed interest in the workshop series and helping fund that.
Thank you. Sally?
First of all, what kind of workshops are you looking like to provide to students, and also what do you mean by non-profit free or non-profit like minimum prices for students?
Sorry.
Workshops. For the workshops, you said non-profit, but what do you mean by non-profit, like free or like minimum, like just to cover up the cost?
By non-profit, I mean like non-profit as like a business entity, so like an organization whose mandate is not to make a profit, but to create some other kind of social benefit. And in terms of non-profit financing, the workshop would be structured largely around like how to acquire and start up an organization, first of all, so like funding bodies and where to approach, but then secondly, like the more gritty accounting and financial practices that somebody would need within one of those organizations.
Great, thank you. So I have Rowan, Eamon, and then Jeremy.
Yeah, I had a question in terms of structure. When you speak for the skeleton board as well as the general coordinator, I was wondering how these positions would be filled.
Yeah. So the first thing that we would do at the end of this month is when we're hoping to finalize on all of the funding sources. So the first thing we do is register the NPO. The second thing we do is put together the board and start to create the actual like regulations, bylaws, and policies for the organization. I was going to suggest, and perhaps it could even be added into the motion, that 2 seats for the board be designated to students, and that a majority of the board formally be stated to be of Concordia undergrads. Then there would be a formal call-out that would be done for all of the different positions, which we would try and generate as much like outreach as possible. And then there would be a hiring process that would consist of the board, in the same way that it's done with the CSU through appointments, for example.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but like who's going to be making the decisions?
Oh, sorry.
Skeleton board.
Yeah, so the skeleton board is in the people working on the project right now, which includes myself, Michaela, Charlotte, and other students. So I'm not sure if you know them, but Bianca, Hussein, Isroy, and then we would have probably Satoshi. The formal board structure, we don't have like fully fleshed out at the moment, but it will be majoritively students. And if anybody here is interested in coming onto that project, I encourage you to do so.
All right, thank you. Eamon?
So I have a couple questions, but they may be more directed towards the incubator proper as opposed to the pilot. Sure. Is that still kosher to ask? Yeah. All right, cool. So the first one is specifically about turning positions on boards into paid internships. Is that, and I am, hold on 1 second, I just want to make sure I have my right place. Yeah, so in the actual big proposal for the social economy incubator, one of my questions is what's actually going to be, do you have a plan for the process of determining how those internships are appointed, basically, who gets those? Right. Because that does have the potential to set up some sort of weird hierarchy within the board. Yeah. Yeah,
totally. So that was a suggestion that was floated, and the idea was a lot of, I'm on the Hive board, I've been on the COTV board, I've been on like other organizations, and there tends to be like an imbalance of workloads that happens on these boards. So the idea was floated that sometimes some of the internships could be geared towards, for example, somebody is interested, let's say, in starting a cooperative student bar. So there is an internship, let's say, that's within Reggie's where they can take up one of the board positions and actually like start to take up some of the work of the board within that role and get some experience in the management and the oversight of a student cooperative bar. But this would only be done in collaboration with the organization because obviously we can't mandate externally that like a board role be assigned in that way. So that was an idea that was floated for later on in the project. As for the feasibility of it, I'm not sure, and that would have to be developed with a lot of consultation, but it's just an example of some of the things that can come out of a project like this.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, there's a follow-up. Yep. This is a little more geared towards the part explicitly about the co-ops already at Concordia and the incubation of new ones within sort of the sphere of influence that Concordia has. Is that the model that's used for the co-ops at Concordia, at least a handful of them, is good, but it's like fundamentally flawed in a couple ways. And full disclosure, I'm speaking as someone who's employed by one of them. There's not always the guarantee of staff being paid particularly well, especially for a business that purports to be, anti-capitalist. And there's this weird notion of like, oh, because we're, anti-capitalist, we should settle for like less because it's a good project, as opposed to, no, because we're this, we should demand this because otherwise we're kind of scabbing over people who work in more corporate gigs doing the same thing. And then there's also the actual representation on like the day-to-day of people working different jobs at these co-ops, which is not necessarily not as non-hierarchical as it could be in at least a handful of the co-op structures at Concordia. I'm least familiar with Frigo. I also suspect because it's the barest bones, it's probably the best in that capacity. But yeah, no, I guess my question here is that given that there are some pretty substantial institutional flaws to the model that is predominantly used for the co-ops at Concordia, their day-to-day representation, their board structure, etc., I'm trying to formulate this, I guess, the actual supporting of these endeavors in like a CSU sort of, or like adjacent to the CSU sort of level using self-fund money. I guess how
to account for that?
Yeah, how to account for that? How tenable is that with the positions we have, and
right,
etc.
So firstly, the model that's adopted by a lot of cooperatives within the Concordia community is a solidarity cooperative. Solidarity economy co-op, or a solidarity cooperative, refers to the structure of the board. I don't entirely agree that there's a necessary connection between that structure and some of the issues that they might be facing, but I would say that when it comes to trying to set up any kind of social economy initiative, you're inevitably going to be making compromises. which is just a fact. So speaking from the experience of the Hive, we try to make all of our food sustainably sourced, locally sourced, pay people well, and keep the prices accessible. We can't do all of that. We have to make compromises in certain areas, and it really sucks. People aren't paid as well as they should be, and we're hoping to get to a point where that isn't the case, but like, these are some of the growing pains of these organizations, and that's something that can be definitely learned for people who are interested in starting these kinds of initiatives. Because ultimately, of course, we'd like to get to a point where everybody's paid at least $15 an hour, and where all of the food prices are accessible for students who are in financially precarious situations. I don't think that the solidarity economy model conflicts with that. I think that what is required is people with the experience and support within all of these roles to be able to make that happen in the medium to long run. And with using Silk Fund interest to do that, I think like that would be, that is in line with the positions of the CSU as they stand now.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy?
Merci.
Okay, Veronica?
So, looking at your budget, you're asking for $60,000 from the Silk Fund, correct? How do you justify this amount, especially for a pilot project, where, in my understanding, most of the necessary work is only in workshops?
So the $60,000 would be justified for two reasons. So firstly, it's justified through the referendum that specifically identified the Silk Fund as a source of funding for social economy startup. And the second is that the pilot serves two purposes. And the first is to lay the groundwork for a full organization, to try and like get that to a point where it could be launched. And the second is to emulate some of the services of that organization, which includes, the workshops and the internship series. So for a full organization, what we'd want is to have like way more internships and way more workshops that are all conducted with the input of the attendees. But for the immediate term, a lot of the work is going to be in setting up that kind of model so that that can be then presented to students through the referendum process.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I would just like to have a better breakdown of where the $60K will go specifically.
Are you, I have some...
Oh, as in what it will be
spent on.
Spent on? Okay. Well, I can do that through a process of...
And I guess I have another question.
You've had two already, so can you answer the question?
Yeah, so the part of the Silk Fund money would go towards the office space rental because that's part of the mandate of the Silk Fund in the first place for student space and a lot of equipment operating and the expenses that are in line with that. The other sources of funding, specifically the Faculty of Arts and Science, would be for the workshop series. Concordia Council on Student Life would also be largely for the workshop series. The Sustainability Action Fund would be mostly for the internship series. So the Student Endowment Fund and the Concordia and the Silk Fund would be for all of the other expenses and especially prioritizing space and things that are in line with the mandates. I would definitely be happy to entertain any kind of amendment that specifies where the funding is to be allocated.
All right. I'll put you back at the bottom of the speakers list because there's a decent sized speakers list currently. So I have Awatif, Omar, Veronica, Kemi, and then Rowan. Awatif?
If you just clarify, as far as I've heard, the board is going to be constituted of a portion, not a portion, the interns that are going to be interning with this pilot project are going to sit on the board. Is that what
No, the internship. Okay. No paid board positions and paid positions will be two separate things.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the composition of the board?
So the composition of the board is something I was hoping we could have a discussion about here because clearly it, the CSU is heavily implicated in this considering the portion of funding that's being requested at the moment. So yeah, as I've stated, I would say that like a minimum of 2 board seats be designated for CSU executives and counselors with the majority of them to be going towards undergraduates. I was hoping that we could have a discussion on that and I have a proposal, which is that there would be 7 seats on the board, 4 of which would be going towards undergraduates and 2 of which would be going towards CSU executives and counselors. And I was going to throw that out after the question period, but...
Do you have a follow-up?
And I was just wondering, who is going to make that decision for the undergraduate student proportion of the board? So except...
It would be the current project leaders that are working on this, which includes the people I have mentioned before, such as myself and Charlotte, Michaela, Isroy, and Hussein, and Bianca.
Thank you. Omar?
So I was just wondering, because it is a pilot project, means that it's a trial run, so hopefully it will take off and it'll be a sustainable venture. But just that being said, why in the first year are we spending almost close to $100,000 in staff salaries and office space and office equipment and so on, which we don't know if we're going to need on an ongoing basis, and also because we could cut these costs and use some of the CSU's resources that wouldn't cost us any additional amount.
So there's a number of things there. So firstly, we are in conversation with the university right now. They have their own initiatives going on with D3, Changer, Shift, and other groups to try and get like a space. But the space requirements that we would need is firstly an office. Secondly, for the coordinators to work out of, this would be like a skeleton. Secondly, there would have to be a sort of like common area in order to bring people in and have like a collaborative working space. And thirdly, a sort of lecture slash classroom space to conduct the workshops. So having all 3 of those within one unit isn't something that's within the capacity, like within the CSU space, which I know from experience, and therefore we'd be looking at renting external office for a year. And as for the other question, that's just part of the, like in terms of like how to justify that spending, that's just part of the operations of the organization as is presented in the proposal and as is mandated for a referendum by the CSU.
Just one more question. Yep. Also, how will the hiring of these staff members take place?
Yep. So after the nonprofit is registered and after a board is put together, there will be a call out for all the different positions, which we'd like to disseminate through as many like forms of outreach as we can, and then the board would conduct the interviews and ultimately hire the staff positions.
Great, thank you. Veronica?
Never said.
Okay. Kemi?
Sorry, I probably will make you repeat. I want to kind of like get back to Eamon's point. So if I understand it clearly, like the internship will be kind of like inside Concordia, or they will be kind of also outside the realm of the university?
Yeah, is it the end of the question?
There will be a follow-up, but keep on.
So the initial internship series is specific to the Concordia community. Some of them, here I'll just go to that page. Yeah, so what Eamon was referring to was what was in the original proposal, which shows like the potential for where the internships could go with the full organization. But the current internship structure is for the Concordia community itself, and it's to conduct research specific to that. So some of the places that it would be great to see like student cooperative initiatives channel into includes areas of the Concordia community like the bookstore, for example, like the cafe that's currently within the library, like other areas that are, you know, they're clearly majoritively students that frequent those spaces. And that would be part of the research that's created, but also like looking into the long term and creating like, you know, models and looking into like market analysis of all these different areas to find out where it is that cooperatives can actually start up. So that's sort of the main drive for the direction of this research from the internships.
And you had sorry. You had a follow-up?
Yeah, it's kind of coming back to this point, sorry. But like, so like those organization will be responsible to pay, obviously, for like the people internship, or to, so it will be coming from like those organizations that
yeah,
pays,
it would be coming from like the incubator as an organization.
Okay,
but
so
they would be essentially contracted positions.
By the staff form and by like the organizing, for example, co-op bookstore, like it will be paying for the internship, or we will be paying the internship?
Oh no, so what this no, it's fine. What this proposal is to fund the pilot project, The pilot project is an autonomous group that works closely with the CSU and the Concordia community. And the pilot project as an organization would contract these positions and pay students within these positions to conduct this research. This research would be to the benefit of the Concordia community and to these groups.
Okay, thank you. Rowan?
Yeah, sorry. I was just wondering, you had a breakdown of different groups that you're applying to for funding from. I was wondering whether or not you've gotten confirmation from any of these groups.
Yeah, so I'll be presenting to the CCSL on Friday, and staff will be making a decision next week, and then we'll be approaching the other bodies. So whenever you have a project of this kind, clearly this is one that is being built out of the CSU largely. So it doesn't make sense to approach the smaller funding bodies until you actually have something substantial on the table. So that's why the funding is lining up in that way.
Right, thank you. Sally?
For the internships, they're only research, or you have other internships types?
Yep, so currently for the pilot, they're research focused. For the full organization, we definitely want to move beyond just research. And the reason they're research focused for the pilot is to help create a database of information, so that it'll help guide the later stages of the incubator and to help guide student enterprises.
Another question.
Yep.
Another question, do you have a board member? Can we be part of that board member maybe later on?
Yeah, certainly. I was going to suggest that again, a minimum of 2 seats be reserved for CSU counselors and executives, and I imagine that would be handled through one of your own internal processes. Yeah, unfortunately, again, Michaela and Charlotte are here today to help present on that stuff, but yeah.
Right, thank you. Veronica?
Yeah, so for in your budget, you wrote that, well, 40K is designated for the general coordinator. That's a very big number, and how would you determine it?
Yeah, so if we are to seriously consider because ultimately this initiative is geared towards transforming the economy, the local economy, both at Concordia and in the long term into a more socially driven economy. And if that's the case, then compensation is something that we have to take seriously, and we have to compensate people in the proper way. So 40K for that, I consider that to be a decent salary, but also considering that a lot of that work will be outsourced. So it can be assigned to different people. Some of it can be done through contracts for various roles. So that's where the number comes from.
Right, thank you. Eleanor?
I just wanted to know if we could return this to
If anyone, it's possible it won't work, but you can interrupt for that. It's a point of personal privilege.
I want to try.
But Omar will turn it up, and hopefully it will work.
So the temperature is fixed at 22 degrees?
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Not sure, but I did change the thing.
In a lot of the rooms, we don't have control over the temperature. Sorry, I'm freezing too.
Monsters.
Omar?
Just a few questions. I may not have seen it, I didn't see it in the long term, so maybe it was somewhere else. But just an incubator, in essence, is usually an organization that provides services to startups to help them grow, like management, space, expertise that a new business would need. Is that an eventual service that you will be providing?
Yeah, I think that for the long term, that is something we'd be looking into. So I mentioned funding that could potentially be geared towards student initiatives. And in terms of a space and the longer term implications, those are all things that we'd like to see happen. But that will also be a large part of the work of the coordinating staff, because they'll be helping to lay the groundwork for the organization.
Just another question.
Yep.
Now you said that it makes sense as to why you want to start off with the CSU as it providing a larger chunk of money, but what if the other sources don't come through? So what is your contingency plan for that?
If we don't have minimum funding by the end of the month, then the project won't get off the ground.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So at this point, there's no speakers list. Oh, sorry, I'm missing you. Sule?
Yeah, kind of build off of Omar's question. So let's say that we vote to give you CSU money, but you're not able to secure other funding. What happens then? You're not allowed to spend the CSU money until you get that funding, or?
Yeah. So the motion is worded that it's to go specifically towards the incubator proposal as outlined in the documents presented.
Okay,
So if the rest of the funding doesn't come through, and I would be surprised in the event that everybody is in favor of this motion, I'd be surprised to not see anyone else come on board as well. But if that was to happen, then the money would just be returned because we couldn't accomplish what was stated within the mandate of the funding within the motion.
Great. And I have a follow-up.
Yep.
So, because of the way that the motion is presented, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds kind of very rigid. So, let's say you're not able to get all of the funding, but you can get most of it or enough of it that you can start up operations. Then what happens?
Well,
then you just
okay. I mean, if
then sorry. Let me rephrase. Is the 165,000 your minimum to start operations, or is it how much do you need to actually get the ball rolling?
165 is our ideal position. I would say a minimum would be 120, and whenever creating a budget for a project like this, you usually try and have the ideal represented within the budget to account for the fact that a lot of funding bodies will, undercut whatever you're presenting.
Great, thank you. Veronica?
Yeah, so do you have an idea of how much you'd be asking for at the referendum for general elections?
No, I do not. In order, and that's part of what the pilot project is for, is trying to assess, how the organization is going to work, and going through some growing pains and figuring out, what it is. What the end budget will be, what the end result will be, what it's geared towards. So all of this that's created, all of this that's presented, this is volunteer labor that's going into it, and there's a limited amount of time that all of us can put towards this. So by having actual experienced people within paid positions working on this, we can start to create a real and rigid framework that can be submitted to students to decide on.
Great. Thank you. Sally?
How can I say that? But if you're asking for money for only this year, and then you're gonna have a referendum question, right? So we're gonna only pay the $60,000. It's not like each year we have to pay. Yeah.
I will say that if for whatever reason it's decided that this referendum period coming up in March, we don't have enough of an idea of what it is that we're going to be putting to ballot, there is the potential that we would be requesting additional funding for a 6-month period to hit the next referendum, which would be in November of 2018. I think that's remote, but this is, as far as I'm concerned, a one-time ask.
And the referendum, you're gonna ask from each student to pay a minimum of $0.8 or something like that, right? It's not from us.
Through the fee levy system is likely the way that this would go down. But again, there's a lot of different ways that an incubator can be created within the structure of the CSU. So that would be something that could also be done in collaboration and consultation with CSU Council. And that's also reflected within the motion, is that we create a midterm and final report to present to council so that you can see the progress that's been done and try and have a good idea of where things are going.
Great, thank you. Not Marcus. Omar?
Okay, so I just have a question going back as to hopefully you do get the funding. But if you don't, then you'll obviously have to readjust your budget. And having looked at the budget, it seems like all of those things are necessary for this to be an actual, a feasible project, to be able to provide the workshops, to have, the human resources to make that happen and so on. Then what would you cut depending on the money that you receive?
So some things that we would like to see but don't necessarily have to be there include stuff like the guest lecture series. Okay. So this is about bringing in external speakers and things like that who have experience from different sectors so that they can share their experiences. So that's something that could hit the block. As well as the salaries reflect I would say industry standard compensation for the positions that are stated there. But if we do need to downsize on some of them, then that would be another area that could happen. The student leadership internship series, you'll notice within the budget and within everything, we have sort of a range. So 1 to 2 interns, 2 to 3, etc. So depending on how much funding was acquired, we could, scale something we were hoping to have 3 internships for down to 1 and try to adjust that way. So there's a number of different ways that we could account for discrepancies.
Okay, thank you. Sule?
I have a question for your salaries.
Exactly.
So it's general coordination responsibilities. That's one position and it's full-time, right? And then you have outreach mobilization is a part-time position. The financial management coordination is a part-time position. So I have a concern with the financial part being a part-time position, especially for a $165,000 budget for expenses, right? Because you'll be looking over, bookkeeping and as well as like financial resources allocations, money transfers to and from organizations and stuff like that. Don't you think that's a bit much for a part-time job?
Not necessarily. I think the plan for that would likely be, because we'd want like a professional to actually be within this, but we wouldn't be able to hire like a professional at that rate. So that rate reflects just outsourcing that position to like a firm or someone else that would be able to handle all of the management for that, because it's just for a 1-year pilot.
Okay, so the coordination is outsourced?
Likely. The financial management coordination is likely outsourced, but also we've budgeted like the correct amount for how much it would be as a part-time position.
Great, thank you. Ahmed?
The same.
Okay, so at this point, there's no more speakers list. So if ever, yes, Veronica?
Can we just know who these stakeholders are?
Yeah, internal or external?
Both?
Okay.
Can we have a full list? I mean, we're giving, possibly
of
giving
course.
60K. We're the biggest we're the biggest contributors. I think the board should know.
Okay, so coordinating team is here. These are resumes. Potential hires. These are 3 resumes for potential hires. And then the reference list I opened earlier shows the different stakeholders externally.
Can you send this to the board so that we can read it over?
Yeah.
The document was sent out with the council docs.
This one was
Oh,
not.
sorry.
The stakeholders list was not. The stakeholders document, as in the external stakeholders document, if you require that it be sent out, I would prefer it to be closed session in the sense that it does represent like a list that would be quite valuable to competing initiatives. But other than that, like everything is fine.
Yeah, if you send it to me, I can send it to the council list only, and executive. Right. There was one more question, Omar.
Would you be, like, how urgent is it for you to get the approval today? Because I personally think that we would require more time, and just to be able to consult more on it, because it is almost $100,000 in funding. So although I really like the idea, I just want to make sure that we fully, like, think through it. So I'm just wondering how urgent it is to get the funding today.
The timeline that we're looking at is to start the workshop series in the winter semester. And because of the funding applications being sent out, I would definitely, like I would say that this isn't something that the project being unfolding the way it is could be delayed in that sense. That being said, like the CSU both has a history of engaging with this project both through mandates as well as through its own initiatives, and there's comparable disbursements of funding that have followed a similar process in CSU's recent history. This includes purchasing or going in with the university on the Hive Cafe kitchen, which was a $250,000 expense, and other comparable ones.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I don't think it's absolutely nothing to do with the amount of money, but it's just the project itself being looked into further. Like, we've given much larger sums at council, so it's not necessarily that it's 100,000. It's just that I think I would like some more time to be able to have a look at it. I have been, I've read through everything that you've provided in the week, but it's just that I still have a lot of questions that generate from the questions I already asked. So just how big of an inconvenience would it be if this was to wait until next council meeting, which would be on the 8th?
That would be pushing the project back by another semester.
Okay, thank you. I have Rowan and then Ali. Oh, sorry, it might have been Ali's placard that I saw.
No, it was fine. Sorry, how would 2 weeks delay push the project back by a semester?
Because the funding bodies that we're seeking, so the CCSL has a special projects deadline that's once per semester. That would involve, like, we'd have to rearrange that and also with the staff, but more importantly, if we're looking to start up in the winter semester, there's no way that a decision being reached by the CSU and then by following funding bodies throughout the month of November, we'd be finalizing on our funding at the end of November, and we would have the month of December to set up the workshop series and the internship series to be launching the following month. I don't think that's a realistic timeline if that's how we'd be starting, so we'd be delaying it until the fall of 2018.
Great, thank you. Ali?
I really think that the documents that you showed us for the people who could potentially work there or, you know, be on the board or whatever should be open session rather than closed session. And
but the stakeholders list that I was speaking of before, like the reason that I was advocating it being closed session is because, or sorry, like the internal stuff is fine, like all of the coordinating team, including myself, etc. But when we're talking about all of the cooperative networks that we're going to be working with, you know, those are representing the networks of the people who are working closely on the project, and it also exposes like exactly the kind of like groups that we're going to be working with to competing organizations. So the university is working on its own initiatives with Shift and Changer, and we're in oppositional stance to them, so I wouldn't advocate making everything that we have explicit. Obviously to council it's fine, but you know, open session documents are accessible by the rest of the groups.
Okay. I have a speakers list. Oh, sorry, did you have a follow?
yeah, the reason why I asked for that was basically because, yes, here we represent all the students, all undergraduate students, but at the same time, it's very important that students see where a huge chunk of money is going and what it's potentially going to be like around in consideration with all these groups. Or
if you feel that everything should be an open session, like we can do that. It's just, it wouldn't be my preference, but I feel that like if there's that much contention on the point, then yeah, I'll concede that.
Okay, we've been on this point for an hour now, and Marcus has been responding to questions for 40 minutes. So although I understand that there's a lot of questions for it, council is a decision-making body. So we either need to make a decision to not make a decision or vote on the motion pretty soon, because I still have a speakers list here of Veronica, Sally, and Omar. Veronica?
I understand.
Okay, Sally?
I just have a question. You said that if we didn't approve it this meeting, it's gonna be postponed for a whole semester. So why didn't you come like last meeting because there was this possibility that we would not approve, no?
Yeah, so the last meeting I presented the general undergraduate survey results, and those are part of the advocacy that helped to create this project. So some of the information that we were like still depending on and figuring out was from the general undergraduate survey, which you know took a bit longer than expected to actually complete and have the results ready. So I presented that at the previous meeting in anticipation of then presenting this as like a follow-up to those results. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Omar?
So just one of the members of the network I saw was an employee of the CSU, which is largely concerning, given that I haven't heard of it before. And it's one of the people that are most qualified at the CSU to be able to comment on this. So had I known, I would have had the time to discuss and see the particulars of this project. So to me it's just concerning that it wasn't brought up by them before, although they're on the list of resources for this project.
Yeah, so that the person in question in that case is Robert Henry. who I've worked closely with, and some of the other members have worked closely with, and has been interested in the social economy project since it's been put to referendum. So although the people listed within the external list of stakeholders have been consulted and expressed interest in varying levels, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're like highly engaged to the extent that the rest of the students, well, largely students working on the project are. So Robert would be somebody that we would definitely want to be talking to throughout different parts of this initiative, because obviously he's like an extremely experienced individual with a lot of his own networks and resources and et cetera to bring to the table. But like we only go back to these kinds of stakeholders when we do have something substantive on the table.
Thank you. Ali?
Since you said that the CCSL, they're deciding this Friday whether you get funding from them or not. Since you're already starting to get, like you might start getting funding this Friday, would it really be a big problem if we decide in our next council meeting, and if it is a problem, I mean, we can still even decide in a special general meeting next week if possible. And it would be better, I think, to like, I don't know, just give us like a concrete budget for like where this money is going exactly. Also like with salaries and stuff like that.